What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto's chakra linked him to women's desires? And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. 6 whole years spent at the academy gave Naruto a near-perfect sixth sense when it came to the school bell. It didn't matter that it had been years since the last time he had heard it as a student. The bell sense still wouldn't fail him. With a grin, Naruto executed a snake seal and had the inscribed paper on the desk explode right as the school bell rang. The result was a delightful chaos made of smoke, a loud bang, the bell's shrill ringing and the students' excited cries. Naruto's grin widened into a fox smile. So chaos at the academy, check. The smoke quickly dissipated and Naruto waved at his excited audience. Very well, class dismissed. Go out and play. The 20-something children stood up with a loud scraping sound of chairs being moved with little grace and started collecting their things into their backpacks, chatting all the while. 2 students, eager to escape the classroom, made a beeline for the door, but Naruto stopped them. 2 things before you all go. Naruto held up the index finger. He used his right hand, so that the sight of his bandaged hand might reinforce what he was about to say. Not that he really hoped a bunch of kids might appreciate the perks of safety, but it didn't hurt to try. First, don't blow yourself up. When penning a tag, check 3 times you draw the seal right before activating it. If it's only the tiniest bit different from the one I drew, trash the paper and restart. Else, your guts will be all over the room, and blood is a pain to clean. Are we clear? He looked at the class. The 11-years-old kids all nodded with a chorus of, "Yes, Naruto-senpai." Some looked green at the gross warning, some looked excited. Weird little buggers. He loved them. He held up a second finger, smiling widely. Next week you're going to have a test on Fuinjutsu. Whoever gets the highest grade will get a personal lesson on sealing by yours truly. Study hard, kids. All the kids squealed and cheered at the announcement. Knowing the severe case of hero worship the younger generation had on him, Naruto wasn't above using underhand ways to motivate the kids. Half the students filed out of the classroom, already fighting among themselves on who would get the prize, while the other half crowded around the teacher desk, talking all at the same time. "You're so cool, Naruto-senpai. Make something explode. Show us more sealing." A green-haired girl climbed on the desk to get closer. "Teach me, Naruto-senpai." Overwhelmed, Naruto laughed and stepped back, his back connecting with the blackboard. Looking at the children surrounding on him on all sides, he felt like a fox cornered by overexcited puppies. "Thank you, but that's enough for today. Why don't you go out and enjoy recess?" The kids pretended not to hear him, or maybe they honestly didn't hear him over the sound of their own chatter, and pressed on. At least until Konoha's hero was saved by the well-timed arrival of a real instructor. "What are all you doing still here? The bell rang 5 minutes ago. If you dislike recess so much, you can all kiss it goodbye for a week if you're not out of here in 10 seconds. Off with you." Hearing the ring of a threat, and well-known Iruka was more than able to carry it on, the children promptly ran out of the door, waving Naruto goodbye with loud cries and cheers. Iruka oversaw the students exit by the door, arms crossed on his chest and a frown on his face, until the classroom was finally, blessedly, empty. His threatening stance melted away, and he raised an eyebrow at Naruto, a smile on his lips and shoulders shaking in silent laughter. The blonde smiled awkwardly back at him, rubbing the back of his head. "You know, you shouldn't have said that. Now they will try twice as hard to cheat on the test," Iruka complained. Naruto laughed out loud. "But Iruka-sensei, I was only trying to motivate them to study. Isn't that a noble goal?" His ex-sensei shook his head with a sigh, but he was smiling. "A few will throw themselves on the books, but all the others will just double their efforts to cheat." Iruka jerked his head towards the door in a silent invitation. Naruto nodded and hurried to collect his belongings. "Well, if they can pull it off without getting caught by you, they deserve their prize, don't they?" Naruto closed the ink bottles and placed them on a sealing scroll covered in scribbles, alongside with his many brushes and a few spare papers. "They are ninja, cheating is part of the job description." Touching the scroll, Naruto activated the seal with a small burst of chakra and the materials disappeared into the paper with a puff. Behind him, Iruka snorted something that sounded awfully like, "show off." Naruto pocketed the sealing scroll and stuck his tongue out at him, showing all his maturity. Yes, he kept his sealing materials in a sealing scroll. It was both practical and funny, like an inside joke. And you know all about cheating, don't you, Naruto? Naruto grinned at his old instructor, absolutely shameless, as they headed out of the classroom and down the hallway. He pretended not to remember all the times Iruka had caught him cheating during tests. You know, the first task of my Chunin exam was all about cheating. They put us all in a big room and had us answer 9 super difficult answers. All they said was that anyone caught cheating would lose points, and who got caught 5 times would be kicked out. It was a game of cheat, and only the best cheaters could get the answers. Iruka this time raised both his eyebrows, the scar running over his nose somehow giving him even more a skeptical expression. And you passed that test how? Naruto pouted, covering his heart with his right hand as if wounded by his instructor's lack of faith. Ah, come on Iruka-sensei. Iruka's answer was a loud snort. Okay, so I couldn't answer any of the answers, and passed because of the 10th question, which was a test of our resolve to take the exam. As if I would give up so easily. Naruto didn't even bother to pretend to be embarrassed at his terrible skills at subterfuge. It was kind of a common joke, how bad the hero of the Hidden Leaf, one of the strongest shinobi of the village, sucked at subterfuge. Subterfuge and genjutsu. Give him flashy jutsu any day over that. His ex-sensei laughed at that, and squeezed Naruto's shoulder, his left one, for Iruka was always considerate enough not to touch his right one, in approval and affection. They turned a corner and finally got the staff room. Iruka opened the door and let Naruto in, closing it after his ex-student. The instructor's safe haven consisted mainly of a small kitchenette, a pantry, a few desks swallowed by towers of papers and a few sofas, over which 3 other Chunin teachers were lazily slumped. The 2 women and the man waved at Naruto and greeted him cheerfully, but none got up. They looked like nothing but the Hokage's direct order would make them get up before their free time was up. I remember I thought being a student was hard, but now I see the instructors have got it worse, Naruto joked. Iruka sent an over-exaggerated eye roll at his colleagues, who happily ignored him, and headed to the balcony overlooking the playground. There the scarred man leaned against the wall and did that teacher multitasking thing that allowed him to both keep an eye on the children playing below and pay attention to Naruto. Thank you for coming, Naruto. The kids love having you over, he said with a smile. Naruto leaned against the railing of the balcony, fully enjoying the sunny spring weather. It's no problem. I like teaching. It's fun. He wouldn't do it for a living, though. Even if he liked children, the repetitiveness of the job would drive him mad, sooner or later. He always needed new challenges to keep him on his toes and fully concentrated. What did you teach them? Iruka asked him. Naruto hummed and crackled his knuckles absent-mindedly. The basics. I showed them the enclosing technique and the corresponding unsealing technique. Naruto grinned at Iruka. I also showed them the Uzumaki sealing technique. That was just for show, obviously. It would be years, if ever, before any of the students would be proficient enough with seals to apply them with a touch of fingers instead of using paper, ink and brush. For traps, I showed them the sealing tag barrier and the smoke bomb. Iruka frowned, sending Naruto a dirty look, and the blonde raised his hands in defense, quickly backpedaling. Only a minor one, I swear. Geez, even I wouldn't trust an explosive tag in their hands. He did set off an explosive tag in front of the class, even though he hadn't shown the design of the seal to the students. His ex-sensei didn't need to know that, however. That sparked another thought, and Naruto tilted his head with a joking smile. Why, weren't you watching, Iruka-sensei? Iruka shook his head. No, I took the chance to catch up with some of the tons of tests I have to mark. I caught only the last 10 minutes or so of the lesson. You came to make sure I didn't show your students how awesome pranks are? Naruto grinned wide. Some of his best pranks had been pulled while at the academy, and Iruka had taken the brunt of it. The man had been a prankster himself in his youth, though, and had taken it all with grace, most of the times. If, with grace, you meant that he didn't expel him. He had expected Iruka to rant against Naruto's past pranks, or maybe even share some stories of his own, but instead the man smiled softly at the blonde. I came to see you. It's a joy to see you teaching. I'm proud of the man you've become, Naruto. That had Naruto reeling, startled. He felt the telltale feeling of warmth on his cheeks, and he knew he was blushing, both in pride and embarrassment. Despite the status of hero, he had gained in the Fourth Shinobi War. Naruto still found himself unused to such heartfelt compliments. He hadn't gotten many in his childhood, and even at 19 they always left him feeling a bit uneasy, though in a happy way. He never quite knew how to react. Thank the person? Deny it? He often felt he didn't deserve the compliments, but people got sad when he tried to correct them or dismiss their compliments. The other knew him well, though, and saved him from making an ass of himself by hugging him. When Iruka let him go, beaming, Naruto tentatively smiled back. He felt the need to say something, anything, to thank Iruka, to express how much the man's approval meant to him, but in that moment he couldn't express his feelings any better than sigh. He didn't need to, though. Iruka let the matter drop by leaning against the railing of the balcony, looking down at the kids. Naruto hesitantly joined him, his elbows on the metal railing and his chin in his palms. Iruka bumped shoulders with him, winking. Naruto looked at him, questioning, and his old instructor pointed with a jerk of his head to a trio of particularly loud children, their roughhousing accompanied by lots of delighted war cries. As they watched, a fourth kid with bleached blonde hair joined the fight, diving in with a yell of, "Here I come." The three kids were bowled over by the child's sudden arrival. Any infight was instantly forgotten and they allied to bring the pale-haired boy down, and down he went, laughing under the wriggling mass of his three friends' limbs. Iruka winked at Naruto again before going back to watching over the whole playground, and the blonde chuckled, his shoulders shaking. So what? There were some similarities between himself and the pale-haired boy. If Naruto had any saying in that meant the Yamanaka kid was destined to awesomeness, for in a village full of brown and black-haired ninja, hair that pale a shade of blonde was pretty much a dead giveaway of a Yamanaka. Naruto looked down at the young boy with a wistful smile, fingers drumming lightly on his cheek. His presence wasn't surprising, for the Yamanaka clan was one of the most prolific, somehow always managing to have at least one student attending the academy at all times. Both Shinobi and Kunoichi from that clan were expected to have children pretty early. Yamanaka ninja seemed to find that perfectly natural, as Ino had shown a few weeks before, during Konoha's 11 bi-monthly Thursday pub night. The discussion had somehow veered off on the subject of children, and Ino had commented wryly that in a year or two they would get all the experience they wanted on toddlers, for she was likely going to have one sooner or later. When a shocked Sakura had questioned her about the seriousness of the relationship with the Chunin she was currently dating, Ino had just brushed it off, saying that it wasn't as if she was going to marry anytime soon. Apparently, marriage and children weren't strictly connected for the Yamanaka. Ino felt it was her duty towards her clan to have kids, no matter who the father of the child was. She also wouldn't have to stay out of commission for long, since all off-duty Yamanaka worked in shifts at the family flower shop that doubled as kindergarten for Yamanaka babies whose parents were away on mission. That counted as a win-win situation in her book, or so it seemed. Plus, I like children, she had said with a wink. I like children, Naruto repeated out loud, his gaze moving from the Yamanaka boy to the other countless children enjoying recess in the playground. Iruka's words startled him out of his reverie. Everyone can see that. I wouldn't have let you teach them if you didn't. Naruto let out a non-committal HN at that, not really knowing what to say to that. He opened his mouth, but instead of generic platitude words about teaching, what got out was, "Are you planning to have kids, Iruka-sensei?" Damn, real smooth, Naruto. He felt like kicking himself whenever his tongue got the better of him. As Sakura said, it was okay to say what you think, but he should really start to actually think before saying it. Iruka looked at him flabbergasted, eyes wide. After a second he got his voice back and asked back, "Where's this coming from, Naruto?" The blonde rubbed his nose with his left hand, looking away. "I dunno. I was just curious." Liar liar pants on fire. The awkward situation had him blushing again. Iruka blinked and smiled. "What, now that Konohamaru is all grown up and a genin, you want a new baby brother to play ninja with?" Naruto, NH'd, again, a sound that could mean everything and nothing. He was starting to get why Sasuke used that all the time. It was an easy way to deal with people when you didn't know how to interact with them. Iruka mercifully avoided to tease him, and actually answered his question. "I don't know, Naruto. Not anytime soon, that's for sure, but I'd love to have children of my own one day." He smiled at the blonde. "It's just too early for me and Shachi to think about kids." This time it was Iruka's time to blush and Naruto's to smile widely. The pretty Kunoichi and his ex-sensei had been dating for a year, and the woman had only recently moved in with Iruka. The two were utterly adorable, in the blonde's opinion, or anyone else's, for that matter. They were as cute as kittens together. You'd make an awesome dad. Wow, his mouth ran off on its own again. It was getting worse, though it was the honest to Kami truth. Iruka's blush worsened, and it was his turn to look away and rub the back of his head in embarrassment. I don't know. Naruto nodded, overly eager. I really mean that. Iruka would be an affectionate father. He could also be stern when the situation required it, though, and would not spoil his kids too much. He would the kind of dad to help his children both with their homework and training, and would play with them tirelessly, knowing that childhood was to be enjoyed, especially in a world where they would be asked to kill people at 12. He wouldn't place unfair expectations on them, and would take pride in their every little conquest. He would always be there for them, literally. His teaching post meant he would rarely, if ever, get missions that could end up orphaning his kids. You would make a great father as well, Naruto. Naruto's head whipped up so fast he had to blink twice to chase away the dizziness. What? Iruka poked him in the shoulder. I said you would make a good father. He smiled, the scar over his nose stretching as he did. A really good one. Naruto swallowed and looked away, suddenly feeling lightheaded. He hunched his shoulders forward, his right hand tightening into a fist. His stomach felt like a heavy knot he couldn't swallow, even if he hadn't eaten anything recently. Hey, what's wrong? Iruka laid a hand on his shoulder and leaned in. Naruto didn't look at him, but could hear the worry in his voice. Do you really think so? He asked instead. Suddenly it was very important. He half expected Iruka to lighten the mood with a joke like, please don't think about having kids before I'm retired or they would drive me bonkers, but the scarred man surprised him by gently squeezing his shoulder and answering, yes, in a soft but firm voice. Naruto peered at the other out of the corner of his eye. His almost father, his almost brother, smiled at him and repeated, yes, I do. Iruka didn't ask why, or voiced any worries. He seemed to trust him with this. If Iruka trusted him, then Naruto could do it. The blonde straightened, raising his head high as he crossed his arms on the metal railing. Right below the balcony, a big group of girls had ganged up and robbed the boys of the ball and were now playing kick the ball and keep it away from the boys. Naruto was glad to see that, at first glance, there was no lone kid in the playground being blatantly ostracized. His child wouldn't be left alone like he had been. His child would be like the Yamanaka boy, with real friends to play with, and happy. Being a Jinchuriki meant that he had to have a contingency plan to transfer Kurama to someone, if need arose. The Kyuubi wasn't ready to be released upon the world. Or maybe the world wasn't ready for the nine-tailed fox to be released upon it, he thought with an inner chuckle. Somewhere deep into his mind, Kurama growl snorted. In short, Naruto needed an Uzumaki heir. The school bell rang, waking him from his reverie. Disappointed, the students in the courtyard burst into choruses of "ah" and "no," but they all obediently went back inside. Beside Naruto, Iruka stretched, his hands up above his head, and headed inside as well. The blonde followed him. The instructor waved him goodbye just outside the staff room. It's been a pleasure, Naruto, thank you for coming. See you. Naruto beamed at him and returned the wave. See you. Iruka went down the hallway, heading to his classroom, while Naruto descended the stairs and left the academy. A quick glance at the clock hung on the facade of the academy showed him he still had plenty of time before his shift at the mission assignment desk. Training sounded appealing. Little good came when he thought too hard about things. He needed to vent out, and what was better than some training to tire the body and lighten the mind? With a nod to himself, Naruto jumped on the roof of the closest building, and headed off to the training grounds. Tsunade grunted in a very unladylike fashion, frustration obvious on her face. The throbbing vein on her forehead didn't bode well. Naruto, the academy did send in the results of the Genin exam, right? Naruto, sitting at the desk on the left of the Hokages, inched away from the woman as much as he could without actually moving his chair. Yes, Ba-chan. He really did not want to be at the end of Tsunade's short temper. The blonde Senju looked at her attendant dead in the eye, and Naruto froze like a rabbit in front of a fox. Then where are they, Naruto? Her saccharine sweet voice was the scariest thing ever. Naruto swallowed, his eyes scanning the room in panic. Tsunade's desk was almost bare, so that couldn't be it. His own desk was pretty cluttered, but as he had caused the clutter himself in the past half an hour, he knew that no academy paper was hidden amongst the documents and reports concerning their trade agreement with Suna. Desperate, Naruto looked at the cabinets lined against the wall facing him. But no, the papers had arrived that morning, and he was sure he had not opened those cabinets for at least a few days. He twisted on his chair and looked behind him, and bingo! The line of cabinets behind his desk was covered in tall, gravity-defying piles of paperwork. Just a moment. He stood up and flipped quickly through the 10-inch high piles of paper sheets and folders. Hospital budget, project for the new canteen, personal missive from the rakeage. The more papers he leafed through, the harder he could feel Tsunade staring at his back. Thank Kami the Senju didn't have any weird Kekai Genkai that allowed them to set people on fire with their thought. More papers, suggestions for Jonin promotion, proposals for the next Chunin exams, there, academy results. With a sigh of relief, Naruto picked the thin violet folder and handed it to Tsunade, who accepted it with a raised eyebrow, looking very unimpressed with his filing skills. Naruto smiled awkwardly in apology, rubbing the back of his nape. Tsunade sighed and gave up, obviously considering him a lost case. The Hokage opened the folder and started reading, humming softly. Naruto sat back in his chair, but peered curiously at the report. New genin meant new teams, and that was always interesting. How many passed? He dared to ask. Reading about Konoha's future ninja must have eased her mood, for she answered without beating about the bush, 40. Naruto gave a low whistle. Sure, almost 2/3 of them would likely fail their Jonin sensei's test, but still, that was a lot. That makes 13 temporary teams and 1 spare. If they go the usual way, that could mean between 3 to 5 new complete teams. Not bad. Tsunade nodded, leafing through the students' single reports. Not bad at all. We need all manpower we can get our hands on, she agreed. Yeah, still, I've never seen so many genin graduate. Naruto's own graduating year had been only of 27 kids. Again, Tsunade agreed with him offhandedly, still reading the reports. 12 years ago must have been a good year for babies. I wonder what happened to make it so. Surprised by the comment, Naruto thought about it. 12 years ago he had been 7, attending his second year of the academy. Try as he might, he couldn't remember much of what was happening in the village around that time. Before he could think too much into it, and likely hurt his brain, Tsunade dismissed her own comment, no matter. What I'm really looking forward to is the graduating class in 10 years or so. Was that glee in her voice? Naruto tilted his head sideways, blinking at the Hokage. What? He asked intelligently. Tsunade looked at him for a long moment, and Naruto felt quite uneasy. It was the how can you not know look. He wished he could say he got it only from his Ba-chan, but truth was pretty much all the people close to the blonde Jinchuriki had eventually developed that very same stare when it came to him. It was Konoha patented by now. Still, Tsunade proved once again to be his favoritist person by explaining what she meant. She made him feel stupid sometimes, but she always explained. You must have noticed how many maternity leave requests we've had in the past year, the woman said, and Naruto nodded. That was true. Naruto didn't keep count, but he could kind of remember most of the kunoichi, and the few odd shinobi, who asked for parental leave. When after a few months he saw them again at the mission assignment desk, he always made sure to ask how their children were doing. Well, you'll be surprised to know that that's not the norm. In normal times, there are only about 2/3 of the births you've been seeing. Naruto blinked owlishly at that statement. There are? Why? Tsunade half smirked, entwining her fingers and propping her chin upon them. Academy reports forgotten. The war. It's common enough to have a small baby boom on the winning side in the times immediately following the end of a war. And I'm not talking about the results of the, oh thank Kami we're alive let's enjoy surviving, festivities. She waved a hand at that, as if distancing herself from such a foolishness. Well, some of the children surely are conceived that way, but most are born to people who were forcibly reminded of their mortality by the war and felt the need to leave some kind of legacy behind. Naruto interrupted her, raising his hand to shoulder level, as if he were still in academy. How is that any different from an A- rank mission or something? He and his friends had brushed death time and time again out there, on a mission or another. Tsunade nodded, taking his question into account. The difference is that the end of a war leaves you the tiniest little bit more optimistic about the future. Your city may be in ruins, and some of your friends may be dead, but you and your loved one made through it, and you won. Maybe it's Cammy's way of telling you it's okay to be happy and have a family? She raised an eyebrow for added effect. Somehow, it works. This effect lasts about 1.5 years, so my prediction is that we'll see a slight decline in births in the next 6 months or so. She shrugged and corrected herself. Well, more than a decline, we'll just be back to normality. Naruto nodded, thoughtful. Tsunade had made him her attendant only after the war, so it wasn't as if he knew what the village was like in normal peacetime. He would enjoy learning, though. Tsunade's lecture wasn't finished, however, and after a moment of pause, she went on. In regular times, ninja don't have children often, or at least a part of them doesn't. Can you tell me why, Naruto? The blonde perked up at the question, lightly drumming his fingers on his cheek, chin propped up on his other palm. Tsunade rarely taught him any lesson straight away. She much preferred to discuss with him until he got to the solution on his own. Also, she honestly seemed to enjoy their debates. Sometimes Naruto even came up with solutions the Godem Hokage honestly hadn't thought of. Ninja unaffiliated with any clans have less children than those belonging to a clan, Naruto answered, thinking back about the thoughts he'd had at the academy a few days before. Unaffiliated ninja don't have a big family to fall back to, and the fear of orphaning their kids holds them back from becoming parents, especially those who are orphans themselves and know what it's like. Clan ninja, on the other hand, generally have big families and know for sure that someone will care for their child if anything happens to them. Also, in a clan, retired and off-duty relatives take care of all the young, leaving the parent free to take missions without worrying about who they left the kid with. Tsunade smiled at him. Very good, Naruto, very good. Naruto straightened his posture, proud of himself. His Ba-chan didn't hand out praises lightly. Unplanned pregnancies aside, another reason ninja have few children is that many have problems forming a relationship stable enough that they may consider marrying and having children. Tsunade halted for a second, giving Naruto the chance to interrupt, but the blonde didn't. Nodding to herself, Tsunade went on. Those who have, for example, lost teammates or loved ones in traumatic ways may develop trust issues and fear tying themselves to someone. What good comes from getting close to someone, if they are going to leave me or die sooner or later? Nothing in her bearing gave away that she may be speaking out of personal experience, except from a small hitch in her voice. Naruto kept silent, respecting her loss. He knew of the pain that drove her away from Konoha. Unfortunately, there are many other issues that can keep ninja from having children. Some of them accept the help of psych medic nin and can eventually get over their traumas, and one day can form a family and be happy. Some don't. Tsunade grimaced, tightening her left hand into a fist, as if her ninja's pain hurt her. Naruto wondered how could anyone even think she didn't care about her people. They were grossly mistaken. And now, Naruto, comes the hard part of being Hokage. Tsunade's face was serious, and Naruto felt the hair on the back of his head stand up. What's more important, a ninja or Konoha? The ninja are Konoha, Naruto answered without missing a beat, conviction in his voice, not leaving it up for discussion. The Godem Hokage chuckled, losing a bit of her stern bearing. Good answer. All ninja together make Konoha. We're getting to that. But if you had to choose between one ninja's well-being and Konoha on the whole, which one would you choose? Naruto was silent for a long moment, thinking. He wasn't a stranger to the concept of sacrificing oneself for the sake of the village, but that usually meant him. Sakura always said he had some kind of hero complex, or martyr's complex, depending on the situation. It just didn't feel right to ask someone to do something he wouldn't be ready to do himself. But he wasn't so naive to think he wouldn't be forced to make hard decisions as Hokage. His father was an example of an Hokage taking a difficult decision, at the cost of his family. I don't know, he answered eventually, frustrated with himself. It didn't feel like the right answer. The village's sake should always come first, but he loved its inhabitants too much to just sacrifice them like chess pawns. Tsunade nodded. She looked as if she knew perfectly well what her question would do to him. Think about this. In order to be a good home for its ninja, the village needs to be strong. Right? Naruto nodded, mollified. And in order to be strong, the village needs to have strong Hokage, sure. But above all, many strong ninja. Right? Naruto nodded again. So, what would you do if your ninja refused to have enough children to keep the village strong? Naruto was about to nod again, but instead froze. Tsunade carried on, answering her own question. You try to help them overcome their problems. You start many kindergartens, you help them financially, you create a valid foster system, you offer psychological help. You let them sort themselves out. Until it's not enough anymore. She sighed, her chin once again on her entwined fingers. Lifelong Chunin are generally left alone. But Jonin? Strong Jonin, even more? I cannot allow them not to have children. Konoha needs their children, their strength. Naruto jumped up, slamming his hands on his deck, and shouted, but you can't, only for Tsunade to do the same. With the difference that her desk creaked ominously, and that the floor quacked the tiniest bit under their feet. Sit down, brat. After a long moment Naruto obeyed, crossing his arms and glaring at the Hokage in silent insubordination. Satisfied, Tsunade sat down as well. As I was saying, Konoha needs its best Jonin to have children, in order for the next generation to be as strong as the previous one and keep the peace. Clans do half the work, prodding their own ninja to do their duty, dealing with any recalcitrants behind closed doors. Since Kekkei Genkei are always kept in a clan's bloodline, you leave protecting the bloodlines that carry Kekkei Genkei to the clans themselves. In order to keep their clan strong on the political chessboard, they make sure to keep their numbers high, Naruto concluded, speaking slowly, analyzing the piece of news. It made sense. Clans singularly maybe didn't care for the sake of the village on the whole, but altogether, they worked for its sake, while keeping each other in check. Now for the other shoe to drop. And what about strong ninja with no clan to persuade them? He thought about Sasuke, and amended, or ninja who don't have a clan anymore. As much as Naruto thought the Sharingan was more trouble than it was worth, he could easily still see how it would fit into this. Tsunade sent him a smirk, correctly guessing who he was thinking about. In order to be restored as a leaf ninja, your Uchiha friend had to sign a contract promising the village at least 5 children, to be had with a woman approved of by the Hokage. The first of which he has to conceive before his 22nd birthday, by the way. Naruto gaped. What? The bastard had told him nothing of this. Naruto was his friend, how could he not tell him? Tsunade waved his objections away. Restoring the Uchiha clan is one of his goals, so it's not as if I'm making him a disservice. I'm just forcing his hand a bit, to remind him who's in control here. She frowned. Actually, his case is pretty easy, since he does want children, sooner or later. She sighed. The real problems arise with the non-clan ninja who don't. Naruto nodded apathetically, still reeling from the sudden overload of information. Sasuke had told him nothing. Tsunade noticed he wasn't paying attention and barked What would you do, Naruto? That shook him from his shock. Tsunade looked very close to facepalming. Instead, she took a deep breath, then glared at him with all the strength of her honey-colored eyes, making him cringe. What would you do with an unaffiliated Jonin who doesn't want to have children? Naruto shook his head to clear it, and concentrated on the matter on hand. It made him feel a bit ill to speak of his fellow ninja as if they were breeding stock. I would talk to them? I would make them understand how important it is for Konoha. I would appeal to their sense of duty. I would promise to help with raising the children. Tsunade's glare faded and once again she was looking at him in approval. Very good. She sighed, leaning back against her chair, hands interwoven on her generous chest. That is exactly what I do. I call them over and talk to them. I try to make them see reason. I ask them to get over whatever their issues may be, at least for the time necessary to produce a child. Yes, I know that sounds callous, but I don't have a choice. The Hokage defended herself from Naruto's accusing stare. Sometimes, just asking is not enough, and I have to issue a direct order. An S-rank mission, given the delicate matter. Their soldiers, thinking of it in terms of mission, often helps them get through it. She smiled grimly. Despite what people think, I don't like to see my ninja suffer. If I can spare them any pain, I do. That's where the wonders of medicine come to the rescue. Do you know how, Naruto? The blonde Uzumaki shook his head. If the ninja has issues so strong they can't bear to find someone of their choosing and have the regular way, I offer the choice of artificial insemination. If it's a shinobi, I'll ask him to provide a sample of sperm a medic will use to fertilize a volunteer kunoichi. Same thing if it's a kunoichi, with the option that if she can't raise the child, it can be given to a foster family, she explained. This way, the ninja doesn't even have to get to know the other parent. If it's necessary in order to develop some particular ability, they will be asked to train the child when it's time, but aside from that they're not forced to interact with their child in any way. It's a choice left up to them. Naruto blinked slowly. I didn't know this was a thing. It did make sense when one thought in terms of doing one's duty to Konoha, but still. Breeding stock. Weren't ninja any better than prize racehorses? He thought about his own vague ideas of having a child himself. Wasn't he thinking of doing the very same thing, planning to ask some faceless kunoichi to bear him a child? In his mind, he would raise the child on his own, but what would the mother have to say to that? All in the name of the village needing his precious Uzumaki genes, and the Kyuubi. Tsunade grimaced, shrugging. It has to be a thing, for Konoha's sake. She probably didn't like it any better than he did. That's what I'm going to propose Kakashi, at least. The man is completely awful, and full of issues to boot. I'm never getting an Hitaki kid out of him the regular way. The blonde Uzumaki started, knocking over a 3-inch high pile of papers off his desk with his elbow. Kakashi-sensei, he cried, not caring one lick about the papers scattering on the floor. The blonde Senju snorted. Yes, Kakashi. Don't be so surprised, brat. At the rate he's going, he's not going to live to see 35. She gave him a look, as if it were his fault. He's overworking himself, and sooner or later even Sharingan no longer Kakashi is going to make one mistake too many. Wait, he's 30? Naruto blurted out. He'd thought him to be at least 40. Tsunade leveled him with a scorching glare for interrupting her. He's 33. Only 14 years older than him? He'd thought him older. Must be the silver hair. Or his old man attitude. Yeah, probably that. Anyway, the longer we wait, the less the chance to have a Hitaki baby. The Hitaki clan was never as big as the Nara or Inuzuka, but they had never dwindled down to just one man. I'm not hoping to restore it completely like with the Uchiha, but I can't allow the clan to completely disappear. Naruto nodded, trying to wrap his mind around the gross concepts of Kakashi-sensei, and, in the same sentence. The two things simply didn't mix. He really couldn't imagine the man in any kind of UAL situation. He could see where the "all" comment came from. Tsunade drummed her perfectly manicured fingernails on the edge of the desk. I'm still looking at possible matches. Some are kunoichi who volunteer, even though they don't know who they're going to be paired with, obviously. Others are kunoichi I personally handpick. She sighed, disappointed. I wish we had that Uzumaki teammate of Sasuke. Karen, was it? She would be perfect to pair with Kakashi. A child from those bloodlines would be a real powerhouse. She snorted, rolling her eyes. But fat chance I'm giving Otto the chance to have an Uzumaki Hitaki when I don't. Naruto's eyebrows threatened to secede and join his hairline for good. Why would you want Kakashi-sensei to interbreed? Sounded so bad. Intermarry with my family? Tsunade's offhand comment had come so out of the blue it went right past confusion territory and right into what the fuck territory. Tsunade peered at her attendant with a slight smirk. What do you know about the Hitaki's Kekkei Genkei? Yup, what the fuck, it is. Is that a joke? In the 7 years he'd known his sensei, not once he had seen anything resembling a Kekkei Genkei, and they had fought side by side a lot, he would have damn noticed. It wasn't as if Kekkei Genkei were inconspicuous. His Sharingan didn't count. That had been Obito's Kekkei Genkei, not his own. The blonde Senju rubbed her temples as if to ward off an incoming headache. Hey, if someone had the right to get a headache, that was Naruto, not Tsunade. He was the one having this piled on him all at once. Okay. Note to self. Next time we're having a complete lesson on all Konoha's bloodlines and their Kekkei Genkei. Naruto settled down more comfortably, sensing an incoming lecture. Long story short, your views on Kekkei Genkei have been spoiled by the Sharingan and the Byakugan. Most of the times, I'll have you known, a Kekkei Genkei doesn't show itself physically. Which, if you think about it, is a damn good way to protect its own existence from the hands of the enemy. Think about the Yamanaka's mental control, the Nara's shadow techniques, or the Akamichi's body manipulation. Even if less showy than the Uchihas and Hyugas, those techniques are tied to their bloodline, making it a Kekkei Genkei. A thought came to Naruto, and his eyes widened in excitement. Do Uzumaki's huge chakra reserves count as a Kekkei Genkai? That would be awesome. He would so love to rub his own personal Kekkei Genkai in Sasuke's face next time he saw him. See how Mr. I'm more special than you took that. Tsunade shrugged, making an apologetic gesture with her hands. I'm not really sure, I haven't known enough Uzumaki to say that. Even if Konoha and Uzushio were allies, villages never share much information about their bloodlines, so I can't really tell. Sensing his disappointment, she added, if you really want to know more, you'll have to go to Uzushio yourself and dig out any surviving records about your family, if the archive is still standing. Inwardly, Naruto promised himself exactly that. Next time he had a mission in the Land of Waves, he was so going to stop by Uzushio's ruins. Anyway, Uzumaki's chakra reserves are exactly what I would love to see coupled with the Hitaki's Kekkei Genkai, which is called white chakra, by the way, Tsunade went on. Even though Hitaki have only average chakra reserves, their chakra is 5 times denser than regular chakra. It's especially devastating when channeled through a blade, or through the limbs in a taijutsu fight. Have you ever seen Kakashi fight with a blade? Naruto nodded. Then you must have noticed the white glow the blade gave off, and the white slash attacks he used? Naruto nodded. Have you ever seen anyone else do something like that? Naruto shook his head. Then why in the Shodai's name did you never wonder about it? Naruto shrugged. It's Kakashi-sensei. Nobody questioned Kakashi-sensei. You just took everything at face value. Tsunade opened his mouth as if to berate him for his idiocy, then stopped, sighed and carried on. That was him using his white chakra. Those attacks gained his father Sakumo the nickname of White Fang during the Second Shinobi War. It may not be as flashy as the Sharingan, but it does have its uses. White chakra always comes with a very, very good chakra control. Imagine Uzumaki chakra stores, but made of denser, more powerful white chakra instead of the normal kind, coupled with almost perfect control. That would be unstoppable. Maybe we could even recreate Kushina's chakra chains technique. The mention of chakra chains had Naruto wincing. He had tried to replicate his mother's jutsu, but there were no written instructions anywhere, and he had gotten exactly nowhere with his utter lack of fine chakra control. The combination of bloodlines Tsunade spoke of did sound promising. Eventually, the Godem shrugged, losing the passionate spark that had animated her amber eyes. Genetic is a bit of a hobby of mine, she almost apologized. This isn't the only impossible match I thought about. I like to think of how I would have matched extinct bloodlines, even if those matches are not actually doable anymore. Naruto just nodded, lost in his thoughts. His mind went back to Kakashi-sensei's issue. So, what kind of deal would you offer Kakashi-sensei? He asked, hesitantly. He had to know, it was Kakashi-sensei they were talking about, one of his precious people. Tsunade hummed, making a broad gesture with her hands. Both psych evaluations and his friends agree that he's completely all. If I asked him to find a woman to have with, he would just freak out, and it's not like I'm going to force him. Although she didn't actually use the word rape, it hung in the air between them. Naruto grimaced in disgust at the thought. No one deserved that, villages Sake or not. So, artificial insemination it is, for him? The Godem nodded. Basically, I just ask him to finally put Icha to good use and send him off to the toilet with his book and a file. She half chuckled, amused, and Naruto found himself doing the same. He could kind of picture the man's flabbergasted face. The child would live with the mother, obviously. As much as I admire Kakashi as a shinobi, he's really not parent material. Out of reflex, Naruto opened his mouth to defend his sensei, but nothing came out. He would have loved nothing more than proving her wrong, but she was right. The man didn't deal well with responsibilities. Don't get him wrong, in a team Kakashi-sensei was the best thing ever, never leaving a teammate behind. But having to care for someone defenseless? For a child? No. Just, no. Naruto refused to think how Kakashi-sensei had done jack shit for him when he had been a kid. He was so not opening that can of worms now. We will also need for the kid to be trained in the Hitaki style. Since I can't be sure Kakashi is going to be still around in 10 years, I'm also ordering him to write down everything about his clan, from learning to master white chakra to taijutsu's katas or any family ninjutsu, so that the kid can be taught by whatever teacher he or she will have. Naruto nodded, agreeing with Tsunade's reasoning, though hearing her talk so dismissively about the death of his sensei left a bad taste in his mouth. He could understand where she came from, though. An active ninja's life expectancy wasn't very high. Both were silent for a long moment. Naruto fiddled with the bandages covering his right hand, tugging any loose ends back in place as his mind examined the problem at hand. He needed to start thinking like a Hokage. He couldn't hope there would always be people taking difficult decisions for him. Eventually, Naruto looked up and asked, "Which kunoichi are you considering for him?" Tsunade tapped her cheek lightly. "My favorite pick would be Yuhi Kurenai." Naruto blinked, and she explained her reasoning. Her great genjutsu talent coupled with white chakra would make a very good asset. Plus, she's a friend of Kakashi and I'm hoping that it would make the situation more bearable for him. The blonde Uzumaki nodded slowly at that. In that light, it did make sense. He didn't know the Jonin from the X-Team 8 very well, but he did know she was a friend of Kakashi-sensei. Her daughter Mirai is 2 years old and not a toddler anymore, and that would make her eligible, but… The Godem sighed. To say the truth, I'm not all that hopeful she's going to accept. From what I gather, she's still very much in love with Asuna and I fear she would think having another man's child would defile his memory. And if she says no, I'm not going to force her, not when there are many other kunoichi volunteering. Naruto pulled a face. But no other kunoichi is Kakashi-sensei's friend. Tsunade agreed with him. No, they aren't. But he wouldn't be the first to give a child to a stranger. The kunoichi being his friend would have been a great plus, but it's not necessary per se. Naruto silently disagreed, glaring at his desk. Kakashi-sensei didn't deal well with obligations. He knew his sensei, and knew his relationship skills. Even skipping the UAL act, the thought of being forced to interact with an almost total stranger in order to see his child would freak Kakashi-sensei out. Like, very bad. He really had problems interacting with people, way worse than even Sasuke. In comparison, Sai was a social butterfly. When he looked up, Naruto discovered Tsunade was looking at him intensely, her head tilted sideways. "What?" he asked, defensive. "You don't agree," she said, and he shook his head. No, he really didn't. Tsunade nodded at that, chin propped in her palm. "I understand. But listen to me, Naruto. What I'm hoping to do here is to give Konoha a Hitaki, but also to help Kakashi himself." Naruto perked up, and she went on. "I'm hoping that the thought of having a child will give Kakashi something to look forward to, and maybe put a stop to his self-destructive tendencies. Both as myself and as Hokage, I don't want to see him dead. Even though he doesn't seem to realize it, the village needs him, just like his friends need him." She shot Naruto a pointed look. "It may sound bad, but he's so full of complexes that we don't even know for sure if having a friendly face would actually help him. What matters is the result." Once again, Naruto disagreed. Tsunade might have known Kakashi-sensei ever since he was a kid, but she hadn't fought alongside with him for the last 7 years like Naruto had. She hadn't spent with him all the time Naruto had. Maybe it was arrogant of him to presume to know the inner workings of a man 14 years his senior, but Naruto had the strong fear that Kakashi-sensei would never be able to relate to his child if every time he looked at the kid he saw the face of a stranger. The man was so wary of strangers he would never allow himself to get close to the kid, in any way. So the therapeutic part of having a child went out of the window. As his mouth was wont to do, it spoke before the thought in Naruto's mind was even fully formed. "I could do it." In the utter silence that followed those words, Naruto crossed his arms. Even if his mouth had run off, he wouldn't took it back. Tsunade looked at him blinking, for once looking honestly surprised. "What? I could have that child myself," Naruto elaborated. His defiant stance soon crumbled under the Godaim's heavy gaze though, and he hunched his shoulders forward, wincing and winding his hands in his lap. He didn't look away, though. Tsunade sighed, for a moment looking all her almost 60 years despite her youth jutsu. "Okay, I'll bite. How would you, a boy, go about having another man's child?" Naruto flinched at hearing it said out loud like that. Embarrassed, he rubbed the back of his nape. "Awkward. My henge is not truly a genjutsu. Not always, at least. If I henge into a chair, it's just an illusion making me look like a chair, but if I henge into a person, it's not an illusion. It's solid. Like a ninjutsu. I can actually turn into that person." Tsunade's eyes were wide in surprise, and Naruto knew why. Solid henge wasn't common, for only the greatest genjutsu specialists could accomplish it after years of hard work. Since he was total crap at genjutsu, she knew that wasn't how he had achieved it. The word shapeshifter hung unsaid between them. Kitsune were renowned shapeshifters. Refusing to speak about that, Naruto did what he was best at, diverting the attention. He stood up and executed a flawless chain of seals, dog, bear, ram, mentally picturing Kakashi-sensei in the tiniest detail. A puff of smoke, and he was Kakashi-sensei. He was taller, though his shoulders weren't as broad. Naruto shrugged, loosening his shoulders. It felt weird to feel so lean. Kakashi-sensei has less muscle mass he did. His arms almost felt too light. A humming sound brought his attention back to Tsunade, whose eyes were roaming all over his body, a hand covering her mouth and thought. Good henge. It sure looks solid. She smirked. Take off that mask, let us see that pretty Hitaki face. Naruto chuckled and obeyed, hooking a finger under the hem of the mask and revealing a fairly plain face. Tsunade nodded, not losing her smirk. If anything, it got wider. Almost good enough, but it's not perfect. Naruto blinked, surprised. What, you've seen his face? Damn, didn't that sound strange, hearing Kakashi-sensei's low timbre instead of his own voice? Kid, that man has been in the hospital more times you've eaten ramen. I sneaked a peek a few times when he was out. Damn, I only got a few glimpses. Not fair. There, he also got the Jonin's plaintive tone down to pat. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. This doesn't speak well for your so-called perfect solid henge. Naruto pouted. Not fair. I can't replicate what I don't know perfectly. This is the best I could do with the few glimpses I caught over the years. Kakashi-sensei probably wasn't the best example, he admitted, walking up to her and holding out his left hand for her to take. But here, this is real. The Godem took his hand in hers and examined it, turning it, pinching the skin, touching the knuckles. To show her the difference, Naruto one-handed dispelled the henge with his other hand. The tanned hand Tsunade now cradled was very different from Kakashi-sensei's. Larger, with shorter, thicker fingers and broader knuckles. The blonde Senju let him go and reclined against the back of her chair, a thoughtful look on her face. That could just be a very good genjutsu able to fool all five senses. Naruto in all answer snickered, going back to his chair. Him, good with genjutsu? Was that a joke? Tsunade let the matter drop with a chuckle as well. What has your henge to do with our discussion, though? She asked, and Naruto performed a henge again, this time into his favorite female form. His jaw was just a bit slimmer, his face narrower and tad more oval, his hair longer and tied in two ponytails, but his eyes and whisker marks were the same. He tried to change as little as possible on the outside, so even if he now had generous breasts, narrower waist and wider hips, his stature stayed the same, just like he roughly maintained his muscle mass and weight. Tsunade whistled. That's your new waijutsu? Naruto nodded, crossing his arms under his breast. While I was traveling with Arrow Sennin, I realized I could keep this going pretty much forever. It drains no more than a fourth of my chakra. His voice was only half a tone higher. He hated startling himself whenever he forgot he was wearing an henge and spoke with someone else's voice. Now, for the real explanation. This was going to be hard. And awkward. Already he could feel a blush coming up. He was intrigued, and urged me to try and keep it going on to experiment. He shrugged. I'll never be an infiltration specialist, but I learned to pull off a pretty decent woman. I did. Lots of experiments with this form. The memories of what Arrow Sennin had pushed him into rose unbidden. Why, hello there, blush of doom. Tsunade frowned, comprehension dawning on her. Does that include having? Did he pimp you out? She asked, incredulous. The human body is physically unable of embarrassment, but Naruto gave it a good try, blushing so hard his ears felt on fire. No. I mean, yes, I had, but he didn't pimp me out, honest. He floundered, hands waving in near panic. I was curious myself, okay? He took a deep breath and tried to go back on track, going to the heart of the matter. Anyway, we discovered that my henge really makes me into a woman. I stayed into my female form for a month, and I eventually got a period. Naruto tentatively smiled at Tsunade, trying to convey the sheer awkwardness of that experience, hoping to get some sympathy. It was the grossest thing ever. I freaked out and scared the crap out of Jiraiya. Tsunade looked speechless. The Godem looked very un-Hokage-like, gaping like that. You. She coughed and recomposed herself. You're telling me that you have a fully functioning female reproductive system? Naruto nodded, his pigtails swishing near his ears. In order to achieve a complete transformation, he'd had to study female anatomy, complete with all the inner bits. Can you get pregnant? Naruto shrugged. Well, I'm not sure, but Ero Sennin thought it was likely. I mean, it would make sense. Tsunade visibly steeled herself. So, let me get this straight. You stayed female for a month and got a period, so you think you can get pregnant? Naruto nodded. Did you experience that again? Naruto shook his head. Nope. I didn't want to repeat that, and so I always paid attention not to stay in female form too long to avoid it. So now you're offering to use this version of your Waijutsu to get pregnant with Kakashi's child. Naruto winced at the wording, but held strong and nodded. Naruto, you do realize what you're offering yourself for, right? You were grossed out by a period. Tsunade laid her hands palm down on the desk, leaning forward. Here we're talking of getting through a whole 9 months of pregnancy, not talking about the aftermath. Why would you put yourself through this? It's madness. Naruto crossed his legs, his slimmer than usual fingers lightly drumming on the ankle propped on his knee, his dangling foot moving in sync. Where to start unraveling that? Only an hour before his half-made plans for a child had been exactly that, half-made. I've been thinking. Tsunade snorted at that, amused, and Naruto shot her a dark look. I've been thinking, he repeated with more force, about what would happen to Kurama if something happened to me. There, that got Tsunade's attention. Go on, she told him with a wave of her hand. If I died, Kurama would either get out, if the seal were damaged enough to let him escape, or would die with me and reform somewhere else in a few years. You know, chakra construct, not being really mortal and all that. Naruto made to rake a hand through his short hair, then discovered his hair was still tied and changed the move to caress one of his pigtails. What we worry about is what would happen to him if either of those situations happened. He's not the furry ball of hate he used to be, but he can't be sure the trauma won't revert him to his original state, meaning, they had as many chances to have a pretty reasonable Kurama on their hands, as well as a raging Kyuubi. Whether it happened on whatever battlefield Naruto had died or half a world away, decades down the line, wasn't important. The devastation he would leave behind him in his mindless fury was. Tsunade was familiar with the results of rampaging Biju, and was pale as she spoke. As Hokage, not thinking about this eventuality was a failure on her part. So what's your plan, and what does it have to do with this mad idea of yours? I need an Uzumaki child to transfer Kurama to, if worst came to worst, Naruto said simply, and Tsunade's gasp told him she had understood what he meant, to make his child a Jinchuriki like himself. Like the fourth had done with him. Tsunade's mouth was set in a hard line, her jaw clenched tight. I see. And it couldn't be anyone else but an Uzumaki, anyone else, and Kyuubi would fry their chakra coils. Naruto nodded, his expression just as serious. If I get a child soon, I can teach the kid about the Kyuubi, and what it means to be a Jinchuriki. It was more than he'd had. Plus, given enough time I'm sure I can get Kurama to actually like the kid, and I can get the child used to demonic chakra since infancy. If I did that, I can pretty much promise there will be no complications or chakra rejection on the day of the transfer. Tsunade had a soft, gentle look that didn't fit her Godem Hokage persona. That was all his Ba-chan. Are you really sure about this, Naruto? Naruto smiled at her, a wistful smile, but an honest one. This is for Konoha. As Hokage, I can't ask anyone to do something I wouldn't be ready to do myself. His smile widened, and there was real happiness in it. Plus, I wouldn't say no to a kid of my own. I like kids. You'd make a great father, Naruto. I'd trust you. Tsunade's soft expression reminded him of Iruka-sensei, but it didn't last. Soon Godem Tsunade Senju was back. Why are you offering to bear the child as a woman, though? Why Kakashi? If you really don't want to wait to marry a girl you love, and want the child now, you could ask Akunoichi. From what I hear, you wouldn't lack volunteers. Naruto didn't correct her assumption that the person he would one day marry would automatically belong to a gender able to bear him children. This conversation was embarrassing enough. He had no intention to also discuss his life or even UAL orientation with his Ba-chan. Not now, not ever. Not happening. What would I say? Hello, would you have my baby, even though we're not in love or anything? But then I get to keep the child, sorry, I need to raise him or her myself. Naruto made a dismissing gesture. Seriously, I don't want to have a baby at the cost of the mother's happiness. Instead, think about this. The blonde breast-equipped Uzumaki planted his hands on the desk and leaned forward, conviction burning in his eyes. This way we could kill two birds with one stone. I carry this baby, and then voila, we have a child who's both Uzumaki and Hitaki. White chakra and huge reserves and all that, and my kid gets to be the most awesome ninja ever. If one considered that one day the child would inherit the Kyuubi, that would make him or her the most powerful asset of Konoha. Tsunade frowned. There's no certainty the kid is going to inherit the Hitaki's Kekkai Genkei, I hope you know that. We don't have enough information about any possible Uzumaki Kekkai Genkei. Naruto swatted her doubts away like with a fly. It wasn't as he was doing all of this for a Kekkai Genkei he hadn't even known existed the day before. This had deeper reasons. Yeah, I can't guarantee that, but so can't any other woman. Even if the child doesn't inherit that, at least I will have for sure someone to leave Kurama to. Best case, we both win, worst case scenario, only Kurama wins. The fact that Konoha would in any case win a Jinchuriki to keep on using to strengthen its position went unsaid. Tsunade still wasn't convinced, he could see it. What if the child by chance doesn't inherit your chakra stores? There are a record of small gifted Uzumaki, just like there are Hyuga without a Byakugan, you know. Naruto hadn't thought of that, but he soon came up with a solution. Well, one more reason to actually carry the baby. That way I can have Kurama expose the baby to small doses of demonic chakra for 9 months to build an immunity and force the development of its chakra coils enough to house him. A long minute passed in silence after that, the only noise being the ticking on the clock on the wall and the faint voices coming from a few hallways down. Naruto spent that time looking at his bandaged arm, opening and closing his hand out of reflex. Was he doing the right thing? Was this a good idea? Sure, if it went well, everyone would gain something from it, but Naruto would get a child to pass Kurama to, Konoha would get both a new Jinchuriki and an heir to the dying Hitaki clan. Kakashi-sensei would be spared some mental turmoil by having to interact with someone he trusted. If Ba-chan was right and being a father could help Kakashi-sensei. Then Naruto would try and get Kakashi-sensei to actually bond with his child. If he could make Kurama like a little human, he was going to take his chances with Kakashi-sensei. And yet something felt wrong. Could it really be this simple? Through the years, Naruto had learnt to distrust things that looked too good to be true. But this was no enemy territory, where an enemy trap could be sprung on him. If he walked into an ambush, it would be one of his own making. Was it worth it? It's almost 5. Don't you have a shift at the mission desk? Tsunade's sudden question startled Naruto. The boy-turned girl looked at the clock, and she was right. With a sigh, Naruto stood up, piling the scattered paperwork with little grace, glancing at the Godem. The blonde Senju caught his look and the unsaid question in his eyes, nodding. I will consider your offer, Naruto, don't worry. She held up 2 fingers. On 2 conditions, though. First, I want to run a series of checks on you to see if everything works and you're really able to bear a child. You're going to stay female without ever shifting back for at least a month to let me run some tests. Report tomorrow morning at the hospital at 8 at the gynecological ward. Naruto nodded, having expected something like that. The second condition is that Kakashi accepts. He deserves to have an opinion on this. He will probably want to talk with you as well before deciding. Naruto nodded again, and asked, when are you going to ask him? Only after we have a definite answer about you. No sense in asking before we're sure. Naruto nodded for the 3rd time. He glanced around to make sure all papers had been picked up, and once satisfied with his handiwork he headed to the door. Tsunade's chuckle stopped him. When he looked at her, she was smirking. People are going to freak out seeing you like this. Naruto looking down at his hot, female body and answered with a similar smirk. It's going to be fun. It was going to be like a great prank on the whole village. What are you going to tell them? Not the truth, I hope. Naruto pouted, offended his Ba-chan had so little faith in him. One never revealed the punchline before it was time. Nah, I'll just tell them I'm experimenting. It's the truth, after all. Naruto snorted. Don't worry, one thing is sure. I won't tell Kakashi-sensei. Tsunade grinned at him. Is it alright to call him sensei when you want to have his baby? Naruto froze, a grimace on his face as his mind provided him with a brief image of himself and Kakashi-sensei having. Please, please, never say that again. If he never thought about Kakashi-sensei like that, it would still be too soon. Naruto shivered and shrugged. Damn it, now the picture was stuck in his head. Thank you, Ba-chan. He changed subject by asking, will you be at the hospital tomorrow? Tsunade nodded. If you want to do this, I will be following you through every step, Naruto. He felt relieved at having his almost grandmother helping him through this. The physical part of getting pregnant and giving birth kind of scared him, and he was glad to have her beside him. Then, she said something he hadn't expected. You're doing this for Kakashi as well, I know it. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. He doesn't deserve it. Her voice was hard, almost angry. Naruto, one hand on the door handle, squared his shoulders and looked down at her. He would not stand for her to insult a hero he loved and admired. I'm doing this for myself and the village. I need an heir, and the village needs its Jinchuriki. But, if a friend needs my help because the village also needs an Hitaki, then it is my duty and privilege to help him. Naruto didn't wait for an answer. He turned the handle down with maybe more force than necessary and exited the room, closing the door behind him and stormed down the hallway, pigtails swishing behind him. Naruto hummed softly as he read the mission request, distractedly wrapping a lock of his long blonde hair around his finger. A silk merchant from Fire asked for a ninja guard for a double mission, first to go to the Land of Lightning to pick up a load of silk textiles, then to tour the Land of Fire to sell his merchandise. The mission desk assignment office was the beating heart of Konoha, and it was a well-oiled machine at that, every cog turning neatly. Clients' requests were written down by Admin Chunin, then those forms were turned to Senior Chunin who determined the rank of the mission and gave an estimate of the cost. If the client accepted the fee, and paid the deposit, those same Chunin would write down a mission assignment, which in turn would be reviewed by a coordinator Jonin. The Jonin would approve it and assign it to the team roster. D-rank and C-rank missions usually weren't assigned to a particular team. It was up to the Genin and Chunin teams to choose which one to take, in an early bird gets the worm philosophy. B-rank and A-rank missions, on the other hand, were usually assigned to a particular team, choosing the team most suited for the specifics of the mission. For Naruto, his mission assignment was Hokage training, so he switched between the three jobs depending on his shift, despite his Jonin rank. Tsunade had been adamant that he needed to know how the village worked inside out, and she was right. Plus, Naruto liked it. It gave him the chance to get to know every one of Konoha's ninja. Naruto chewed on the end of his pencil, deep in thought, and glanced at the map of the 5 great shinobi nations map hanging on the wall on his right. Konoha and Iwa weren't in a state of barely hidden hostility anymore, technically, but ninja had long memories, and both sides were unlikely to let grudges from the Third Shinobi War go easily. While the merchant only requested protection against bandits, he had to consider the high chances of meeting aggressive Iwa ninja, and the eventuality of a skirmish. He couldn't send low-ranked ninja in enemy territory, that was for sure. Naruto looked at the estimated time for the whole voyage, 5 months. That was a long-ass mission for only one team, but if he rotated 3 teams, it would become bearable. Naruto hummed. He could send a Jonin team for the trip to Iwa, have a Chunin team switch with them for the northern selling itinerary of the merchant, then in turn switch them with a Genin team for the southern itinerary. While the northern itinerary would skim rain, grass, waterfall and sound, the southern itinerary was deep into fire territory, far away from any enemy nation. It sounded like an ideal sea mission to get a Genin team used to life on the road. Satisfied, Naruto nodded to himself and penned an answer for the merchant, detailing how his guard would switch throughout the travel and the exact fee for the mission. He debated whether to just put it with all the other answers, to be picked up by the clients themselves in the afternoon at the Hokage Tower, or to have the answer delivered directly to the merchant. Then he looked again at figure the he-man would be paying for their services, and decided for the latter. Considering the size of the mission, the man deserved to be contacted directly. Naruto touched a seal engraved in a metal plaque on the left corner of his desk, releasing a small burst of chakra. The seal glowed white for a moment, then faded. Naruto rolled up the scroll and looked expectantly at the rear door of the mission assignment room. Less than a minute later the door opened and a chunin in her mid-20s entered, her orange armband denoting her as belonging to the Communication Corps, and looked around, trying to guess which of the many mission assignment chunin had called for a courier. Naruto raised a hand and waved her over. "Here, Inko-san." The kunoichi headed his way, only to stop abruptly halfway. Naruto-san?" she asked, her voice wavering in disbelief, her eyebrows halfway up into her hairline. Naruto chuckled, crossing his arms under his breasts to underline their generous curve. "Yes, Inko-san?" He was having a field day, shocking people left and right. It could almost be worth having a period. Almost. Inko blinked, then flashed her hands into a tiger seal. Kai. Naruto's smile widened into a shit-eating grin. That made 5 people who had tried the genjutsu dissipation. Not bad for a morning of work. When nothing changed, Inko stepped forward to his desk, her orange eyes suddenly suspicious. "Why are you a woman, Naruto-san?" Naruto tried to rein in his fox grin and assume an innocent expression. From the way Inko's left eyebrow rose, he wasn't very successful. "I'm just experimenting with my henge. I have Tsunade Ba-chan's approval." There, throwing his relationship with the Godem Hokage in was a good way to get people to stop asking him questions. Inko shook her head in disapproval, but no one could stay irritated at him for long, and eventually she smiled. "Well, I do hope you're not using that to get into the women's side of the bathhouse." Naruto gripped the left side of his chest as if his heart hurt, or more specifically, his left boob, making the kunoichi laugh. "How could you think something like that of me, Inko-san? I thought we were friends." Naruto liked Inko, she was funny. Plus, her shaggy black hair had 2 bright orange streaks in it. How cool was that, having orange hair? Your teacher was the legendary pervert, so. The woman gave another chuckle, then seemed to remember her job and straightened up. "What do you need delivered?" she asked, pulling a notebook and a pencil from her side pouches. Naruto held out the scroll. "This is for Shiruka Urite, a merchant staying at the Pink Blossom Inn." Inko wrote it down, giving a low whistle. "Rich guy," she commented, taking the scroll and putting it into her shoulder bag with the Communication Corps insignia. Naruto nodded. "Yup, he's a big client." "Well, I'll deliver this right away, then. Bye Naruto-san." She waved at him and turned, disappearing into a perfect shunshin, trademark of the Communication Corps. Naruto went back to work, inwardly grinning at Inko's accusation, as if he was going to be stuck in female form for a year without reaping at least some benefits. He could almost imagine Ero Sennin strutting about in the afterlife, all proud of his pupil. He was so going to hit Konoha's bathhouses sooner or later to mix with the ladies. He was going to miss the men's side of the bathhouses though. He tried to find consolation in telling himself that it would be only for a year. He could survive. With a chuckle, Naruto wrote down the 3 mission assignments. A C rank for a Genin team, a C rank for a Chunin team and a B rank for a Jonin team. Technically, he shouldn't write those down until the merchant had officially approved his estimate offer, but the man was obviously going to accept anyway, so why not start working ahead? He reread the assignments and had an idea. Technically, assigning missions to specific teams wasn't his job. It was the mission assignment coordinators. However, Naruto had the perfect team in mind for the B rank. Team Samato was a good tracker team, with a Hyuga and an Inuzuka. They would be able to spot trouble long before it found them, and with a little luck they would avoid conflict with Iwa Ninja completely. Also, all members happened to be in Konoha. Naruto was pretty sure of that. With a satisfied smile, Naruto wrote, "Suggestion. Team Samato," on the first mission assignment, then rolled up all the 3 papers and put them in the "on hold" box behind him. They would most likely be checked by the mission assignment coordinator in the afternoon before being dispatched and assigned. Naruto twisted on his chair to look up at the big clock hung on the wall behind him. Only 10 more minutes and his shift would be over. He turned back to his desk and fished out another mission request from the never-ending pile on the left corner of his desk. As he was starting to read it, an old man requesting a genin team to weed his garden, read as a retired shinobi was bored and wanted to amuse himself by picking on the youngest generation. Someone entered the mission assignment room by the main door. Someone very green and very loud, accompanied by someone just as green and loud. If my youthful pupil can climb the Hokage mountain only with his hands, Then I shall accompany him despite my injury to prove my youth. Naruto overheard Guy saying, well, he wasn't listening in per se, not when the Jonin was pretty much shouting. Naruto was glad to see that being confined into a wheelchair and having his right leg in a permanent cast didn't do anything to smother Guy's power of youth. But the elegantly dressed mission desk Chunin who Guy and Lee were approaching didn't seem to agree with him, if Hyo's comically wide eyes were any clue. Hopelessly, Hyo tried to make himself as small as possible behind his desk, difficult, considering he was one of the tallest men Naruto knew, and tried to hide his face behind some paperwork he picked in haste. Naruto tried not to laugh at his colleague's evident panic. Tried and failed. Hyo shot him a look, his midnight blue eyes practically begging Naruto to save him. Please, please, he'd do whatever. Just save him from the green freaks before they dragged him to run 10 laps around Konoha again, please. Taking pity on the man, Naruto waved at the pair. No, wait, trio, Tenten was there as well. Her presence was always overshadowed by her teammates and ex-senseis. Hey there, Guy-san, Lee, Tenten. The three ninja waved back and changed course. Hyo looked at Naruto as if he might cry in relief. You owe me one, Naruto silently mouthed Hyo, and the man nodded enthusiastically, his long black hair flying everywhere, before diving back into his paperwork, eager to attract as little attention as possible. Silently laughing at his co-worker's misery, Naruto moved his attention to his friends, only to find them frozen, looking at him agape. Oh yeah, he had boobs. He kept on forgetting that. Ops, Kunoichi-san, are you perhaps related to Uzumaki Naruto? Lee asked, his eyes shining eagerly, and Guy backed him up. You look very much like him. Behind them, Tenten silently facepalmed. Well, that was new one. For a split second, Naruto entertained the idea of pretending to be his long-lost twin sister. She could have a cool backstory, like being kidnapped from Iwa Ninja the night they were born, and being raised by the toads on Mount Myoboku, where they reunited many years later with a great deal of misunderstanding and brotherly love. Yeah, that sounded cool. Then he thought of what Ba-chan would do to him if she heard word of that, and gave up. Chuckling at the idea, Naruto leaned back into his chair and waved his friends over. Lee, Guy-san, it's me. I'm just under Henge. Lee sent him a puzzled look, his bushy eyebrows scrunching close. Why are you pretending to be a woman? He asked, and Guy followed suit, with a serious expression that looked very much out of place on him. It's not a very youthful endeavor to deceive people like that, Naruto-kun. Naruto laughed uneasily, rubbing the back of his nape, feeling awkward under their scrutiny. Peace, peace. I'm not deceiving anyone, I'm just experimenting to see how long I can keep in Henge. It's nothing bad, I swear. Oh, magic words. Or at least he thought he had said them, for Lee's and Guy's expression immediately morphed into one of approval and pride, their eyes shining. Testing oneself to overcome one's limits is truly a youthful endeavor indeed. Lee said, raising a fist in a victory sign, while Guy leaned forward in his wheelchair to take Naruto's hand into his own larger ones, his black eyes bearing into the blonde's. Please forgive us for jumping to defamatory conclusions, unworthy of any youthful ninja. I shall do 300 push-ups in shame. Naruto blinked, slipping his hand out from Guy's hold. Okay, I'm sorry, you're welcome. There's really no need to do that. Weirded out and feeling really out of his depth, it was Naruto's turn to look at someone else for help. Tenten snorted at his puzzled stare and jabbed Lee in the ribs none too gently. It wasn't as if she would have been able to hurt the taijutsu freak even if she put all her strength in it, anyway. Lee, don't you have a mission report to give Naruto? The younger green-clad shinobi stood to attention, seemingly remembering himself. Yosh. Lee fished out a scroll from one of the side pouches of his Jonin vest and handed it to Naruto. Tokabetsu Jonin Rock Lee, and Chunin Mori Tenten, reporting from a successful B-rank mission. Lee's fingers drummed a very quick rhythm on his thigh, as if forcing his body to stay still long enough to hand in a report was too much to ask of him. The boy had so much energy it was a pain for him to stand to attention. Did you encounter any enemy ninja? Given that their mission had been to the east of the Land of Fire, Naruto highly doubted it, but protocol demanded he asked. As he expected, Lee answered, no, Naruto-kun. Did anything else of interest happen? Again, Lee answered negatively, and Naruto dropped his report in the first drawer of the filing cabinet at his right, labeled Priority 1 Report Review, to be read later. The two drawers beneath it bore the labels, Priority 2 Feet and Priority 3. Priority 1 reports were read and filed by the people manning the mission desk, while Priority 2 reports were sent to the Intelligence Division. All Priority 3 reports, however, were for the Hokage's eyes only. Formalities fulfilled, Naruto stood up and joined his friends on the other side of the desk. He didn't like talking to them sitting behind a desk. He was set on not letting his position come between him and his friends. He wouldn't be a Hokage who lived above his people, instead of amongst them as it should be. "How was it? Did you have fun?" he asked, smiling widely. Tenten snorted, casually bumping her teammate. "It's not as if I had the time to enjoy the sights. You see, someone thought it would be a youthful endeavor to see if he could get to the city of Senton in under 4 days. Lee, under the mistaken impression she had been praising him, puffed his chest out, preening like the peacock he looked like in his green suit. Tenten rolled her eyes at Naruto. "Look at what I have to live with," and Naruto laughed. "And we did, Yash. Didn't we, Tenten?" Tenten rolled her eyes again, but nodded at Lee, "Indeed." Tenten stepped close to Naruto and spoke close to his ear, covering her mouth, but her stage whisper betrayed her words for everyone to hear. "The last day Lee didn't run as much as he ran from me. The ass refused to share his ration bars until we got to the village, and I might have snapped a little bit." Naruto laughed out loud at that. He could kind of picture the scene, and it was a hilarious one. He wished he could have seen that. "I take that Shuriken were involved in the chase?" Tenten grinned, a tad evilly. "You could say that." Lee smiled and stuck his good guy pose, his caterpillar eyebrows seemingly given a life of their own as they wriggled. "My teammate is a most youthful kunoichi, always training, even when traveling. She never stops practicing her aim." Naruto's laugh came back with a vengeance, to the point he had to lean back against his desk to stay upright. Tenten muttered something that sounded awfully like, "Why'd I even try?" but she was smiling. Much like with Naruto, nobody could get truly angry at Lee for long, even if, in Naruto's opinion, that was because Lee was so eager and clueless it made you feel like kicking a puppy. In his case it was more because of his devilishly good looks. Either that, or Sakura was right and people thought he was adorable. But he refused to accept that. Guy beamed at his two ex-students, manly tears running down his cheeks. "I'm so proud of my students. The power of youth burns so brightly in all of you." Lee was moved to just as manly tears by his ex-sensei's praise, and the two hugged, complete with a majestic sunset on the background. For a taijutsu specialist, Guy sure was good at setting that kind of genjutsu without hand seals. Naruto exchanged an awkward glance with Tenten, who just shrugged. Naruto liked Guy and Lee, even if it was kind of exhausting to be their friend, mentally and physically. However, Naruto didn't fail to notice that Tenten, just like him, was avoiding to look at them. In the many years she spent under her sensei, that sight had probably been seared into her retinas forever. Naruto felt the need to change subject. B rank meant 2 days of obligatory leave for both Lee and Tenten, so. "Will you be there for our Thursday pub night?" he asked. Bad luck made it so that the two had missed the past 4 pub nights in a row. Konoha's 11 gang made a point to keep in contact as often as possible. After all they had gone through, they were thick as thieves. Tenten nodded. "Sure, it's been a while." Her grin was a sly one. "Is Kiba still trying to ask Sakura out?" Before Naruto could answer, Lee emerged from his hug with Guy and butted in, eyes wide and mouth slack in surprise and outrage. "What? That dog is trying to court my delicate cherry blossom. If he dared to lay even a single finger on her, all." Laughter bubbled up in Naruto's throat as he gaped, managing to choke on his own spit. "Delicate cherry blossom? Sakura? I can kill you with a punch, Sakura? I'm as delicate as a dropkick to the face, Sakura?" Were they even talking about the same person? He didn't know Lee was still after Sakura, that was too precious. He was Sue teasing his teammate to death. His own, probably, but it would be Sue worth it. Thankfully, Guy showed he hadn't earned his Jonin rank without being able to read the atmosphere, and leaned forward in his wheelchair to put a hand on Lee's arm, reprimanding him. "It's not youthful to speak ill of people who are not here to defend themselves, Lee-kun." The newly minted Tokubetsu Jonin calmed down immediately, a serious expression on his face, his overly bushy eyebrows scrunched together. You are right, Guy-sensei. I shall find Kiba-kun and I challenge him to a duel for Sakura-san's hand. Without so much as a by your leave, Lee turned on his heels and ran out of the mission desk room, leaving behind a resigned Tenten, an amused Guy and a puzzled Naruto. One never got bored when the X-Team 10 was involved. Tenten shook his head, then shrugged. Whatever, I'm too tired to go after him. She turned towards her ex-sensei. Shouldn't you follow him? Guy seemed to ponder the question. I probably should go cheer his youthful endeavor, Yash, he said, turning his wheelchair to follow after Lee. I meant that you should stop him before he does something stupid, Sensei, Tenten corrected him, snorting and crossing her arms over her chest. Guy looked back at her and wriggled his eyebrows, giving her a thumbs up. How could I smother his power of youth, Yash? Naruto wasn't fluent in Guy speak, but he had strong suspicions that meant the Jonin wanted to have a good laugh at his ex-student's expense. As if, Tenten snorted again. Guy's hands went to the wheels of his chair, but then he suddenly seemed to remember something, for he stopped and turned towards Naruto. Is my hip rival back in Konoha? He asked, and Naruto nodded, squashing firmly any improper thoughts about his sensei. No, about Kakashi. He smiled as if nothing was wrong and answered, sure. He came back yesterday morning. He'll be in the village for at least 2 days. Again, obligatory rest after a B-rank mission. Guy beamed his white-toothed trademark smile. Good. It's time I challenge him to a new youthful duel. The score is currently 89-85 in his favor, and I shall rectify that. The green-clad Jonin waved at the two and wheeled out of the room. While the man was, obviously, off-duty, he often accompanied his ex-students to the mission assignment to keep up with their progresses. Tenten tilted her head at Naruto, smiling. Well, I'll be off as well. I need a shower, food and a bed. Naruto glanced up at the clock on the wall. 5 minutes past 1, my shift is over. Wanna grab something to eat together? Tenten hummed, then nodded, uncrossing her arms. Sure, why not? She grinned at him, poking him in the ribs. Not ramen, though. I need meat. Naruto pouted at the thought that someone might like any food better than ramen, but he acquiesced easily. He'd had Ichiraku ramen, and lots of it, for dinner just the previous evening, to get over the shock Tsunade had dropped on his head. Naruto quickly made sure he hadn't left any important document lying around. He hadn't, then checked he still had all his belongings on him, like his precious frog wallet Gama-chan. Satisfied, Naruto picked up his trademark red haori with black flames from the coat rack and put it on. He turned to Tenten, smiling. Shall we go? Soon after he finished his meal, Naruto went running. Running was very important. Naruto would have gone as far as to say that running was fundamental for a ninja, for it was hands down the best way to build up stamina. Ninja were often required to run for hours on end on a mission, and if they happened to be running from someone, a ninja short of breath was a very dead ninja. And aside from being able to run for long periods of time, stamina was important in a fight. If you couldn't beat your opponent by taking them by surprise, outlasting them was the second best way to win a fight. Naruto knew that very well. Kakashi-sen Kakashi had been adamant on that, and Jiraiya-sensei even more so. Even if Naruto was gifted with a naturally freaky stamina, he still needed to run like everyone else to keep his muscles fit. That didn't make running any better in Naruto's book. Running was important, but Naruto hated running. He hated it with a passion. Running was so boring. There were only so many hours he could spend running before he came to know every inch of the training grounds and the forest surrounding Konoha. It was just so boring to run in circles seeing always the same things. At least when he had been traveling with Ero Sennin there was always something new to see. But no, not in Konoha. Damn, he knew every tree and track like the back of his hand by now. When there was someone running with him it wasn't so bad, because at least he could chat. It wasn't his fault he got bored so easily. When he didn't have anything, or anyone, to distract him, every mile felt like 1,000. And so was that day, for he hadn't found anyone to con into running with him. His favorite running and sparring partner, a Jonin named Dansei, was out of the village with his genin team for their first C-rank mission, and his second favoritist partner, Sai, was nowhere to be found, the bastard. Naruto was used to running 6 or 7 miles every 2 or 3 days, but that afternoon he stopped only 2 miles in when he reached training ground 23, giving up when he got so bored he got this close to summoning Gamakichi to run in his stead. Boredom, however, was only half of the reason he just gave up. His boobs were hurting him. Hurting him, as in that for every step he ran, they bounced and on the long run, pun, that hurt. Naruto hadn't thought much about it when he had dressed that morning, for he, obviously, didn't have a bra lying around at home ready to use. As he looked at himself in the mirror, he had only spared one thought about bras, vaguely thinking he'd buy one sooner or later. Well, that, sooner or later, had just became a, sooner rather than later, for he had severely underestimated how uncomfortable big boobs were. He wished he had thought of at least binding them with a spare roll of bandages. Anything would have been more comfortable than feeling them bounce so much. With a sigh, Naruto massaged the upper part of his breasts, soothing the soreness. Back when he had experimented with his henge, Ero Sennin had kept him busy with his infiltration training and Naruto hadn't exercised much, making this a completely new discovery. As Naruto looked around Training Ground 23, grass and packed earth and a pretty pond, he wondered how Hinata could fight. Or, Kami forbid, Tsunade. But since they did and never once gave sign of being uncomfortable, Naruto imagined it all changed when breasts were properly contained in a bra. Kami, but he wanted one now. Why had he made his female form with such big boobs? Oh, yeah, they looked good. Hindsight was a bitch. Naruto carted one hand through his long hair, pouting. He couldn't even shift to make them smaller, for Tsunade had forbidden him from changing anything about his henge. She had said that any change of his henge would likely reset his biological rhythms, and since that morning he had started his month-long checkup, she had no intention of starting over again. Running was out, but Naruto still had to warm up as he waited for Sakura to arrive. With the ease born of long years of training, Naruto fell on all fours and started doing push-ups, his body taut and his muscles coiled like springs as his arms bore his weight up and down. The exams at the hospital had gone pretty much the way Naruto had imagined. Tsunade had pricked him with needles to get a few blood samples, and told him he would have to submit himself to that once every 3 days. Joy. She had said she wanted to keep a close watch on his hormone production throughout his cycle. It made sense, he guessed, but that didn't make it any better. He hadn't even gotten a lollipop for his efforts. He was starting to understand why Kakashi Sen Kakashi, damn it, hated hospitals. When he reached his 100th push-up, Naruto shifted his weight and bent his left arm behind his back, seamlessly moving to one-armed push-ups. After a set of 100, he changed arms and did another 100 with his right arm behind his back. He had also expected some kind of gynecological exam, given what the purpose of that farce was. Tsunade had him take his shirt off and lie on his back on a bed, where she palpated his breasts, weird, and his belly, even weirder, her hands glowing green. The feeling of foreign chakras seeping inside him through his flesh had Naruto shivering, feeling sick to the stomach. She had explained that it was just a medic nin technique that allowed her to see the organs through touch alone. In particular, it had allowed her to see that his womb and ovaries looked healthy, if somewhat atrophied. But considering it was only his second day in female form, it was to be expected, or so she had said. Naruto trusted her. Finished with his push-ups, Naruto sat on the grass and rolled his shoulders to loosen them. With a huff, he then laid on his back and interwove his fingers behind his nape, mentally beginning to count as he started to do his 100 sit-ups. The only thing he hadn't expected had been to meet Aishamasu Hyuga, chakra specialist, in the gynecological ward. Not that he didn't like her, she was a nice woman without any of the, famous Hyuga arrogance. But he hadn't expected a chakra checkup. Tsunade had explained she wanted to know more of how his solid henge worked, though, so it kind of made sense. Aishamasu had studied Naruto's chakra paths with her Byakugan extensively the previous year, when Tsunade had subjected him to 1,000 very thorough exams to study his Jinchuriki physique. Tired of playing pin the tail on the donkey whenever she had to heal Naruto, and the Hyuga's perfect memory had allowed her to compare male Naruto's chakra paths to female Naruto's ones. The verdict had been that they were 100% identical. Not even two identical twins had chakra paths so similar. Naruto jerked his hips upwards and effortlessly jumped to his feet. Cracking his knuckles, Naruto looked around for a means to test Aishamasu's and Tsunade's hypothesis. That Naruto should be able to use his chakra as if nothing had changed. Back then when he had been 15 with Jiraiya-sensei he had tried a few jutsu in his female form, but he hadn't tested that thoroughly. He had been too busy testing other things thoroughly. With an amused snort Naruto repressed all memories about his first UAL exploits. Oh Kami, he had been so young, and headed to the pond. Since there were no trees on training ground 23, he would skip tree walking and try his hand at water walking, hoping he got it right on the first try, for he really didn't want to get wet. Clasping his hands in a ram seal, Naruto focused a steady flow of chakra to in his feet. Usually he bypassed the ram seal completely, but as he couldn't be sure his tenketsu would release chakra without hiccups, better safe than sorry. Slowly, he stepped with his right foot on the pond's surface to test the waters. Pun again. Since the sole of his sandal didn't seem to be sinking, he took another step and left the dry ground for good, and would you look at that, the water seemed to hold him without problem. Naruto took a few cautious steps, taking care not to shift his weight too much. It seemed good. Since Patience and Naruto went along as well as porcupines and balloons, the blonde Uzumaki decided that careful was overrated and did a backflip, still holding the ram seal. He landed squarely on his feet just as if he had done it on dry land, and smirked. Everything was working properly. He released the ram seal, and nothing happened. The feeling of his chakra enveloping his feet was exactly the same as always. Satisfied with himself, his henge was the best, so of course he could fight. Naruto preened and looked around, hoping to see Sakura. He really wanted to boast about his skills. Sadly, there was no Sakura anywhere. He couldn't feel her chakra nearby, either. Hospital duties had probably delayed her. Too bad. He'd have to find something to entertain himself as he waited for her. He never doubted she wouldn't come. She never missed their weekly sparring match. Naruto looked down at his feet, sheathed in blue chakra, barely rippling the water. He shrugged, humming and thought. Revising katas was always good for muscle memory, and doing it on water had the added bonus of testing his instinctive chakra control. If he managed to stay on top of the water even when not actively concentrating on that, it meant that both his chakra control and the way his tenketsu released chakra hadn't changed. With a smile, Naruto loosened his shoulders and took the starting stance of his kata, right arm guarding his chin and left arm guarding his side, feet evenly spread. He shifted, step, punch, low dip, turn, kick, step back. Naruto huffed, imagining an invisible shinobi in front of him, and the best ways to incapacitate him. Step, a fast jab, raising his guard to block a possible countermove, a step back, then a high, fast kick that would leave his opponent with a broken jaw at the very least. Naruto would never be a taijutsu master like Guy or Lee, but his fighting style relied heavily on it. He was most efficient on short range, where he could use his superior speed, thanks Dad, and superior strength, thanks Kurama, to pummel the enemy into the ground. Over the years, he had worked on ways to integrate many close-range jutsu, thanks again, Dad. Rasengan was so cool, into his katas, until they became a seamless part of it, just like punches and kicks. The result was a taijutsu style that looked like the bastard offspring of a one-night stand between a brawler style and a high-power one, making Kakashi despair over how crude it looked. Naruto just laughed at him because it worked damn well. Step, low dip, turn, a shunshin bringing him behind the invisible opponent's back, a mid-height roundhouse kick snapping out and back without the faintest falter despite the body flicker. Recover, guard face, guard right flank, jump, kick to the face, sail over the enemy's shoulder, land on a handstand, backflip, foot lashing out as he did, kicking hard. Recover, slide back, high strike, low strike, block with both forearms, dip low, sweep, jump back. Recover, create a Rasengan in his left hand, sprint, feint with his left hand, kick, guard, sweep, punch the fucker in the stomach with the Rasengan. Since there wasn't actually anyone to pummel to the ground and Naruto didn't want to waste his awesome Rasengan, he chose to end it with a bang. With a fox grin, Naruto jumped, somersaulted and struck the water fist first. The Rasengan hit the water as if it were a hard surface, vaporizing a good deal of water and raising a huge wave. Shouting in glee, Naruto managed not to sink underwater and instead leapt off, not quick enough to avoid the waves he himself had raised, though. Mission Test chakra control in hench, a success. Not even being drenched to the bone could dent his enthusiasm. Good thing it was spring, and the day was warm. He'd dry soon, hopefully. Still, he'd had enough of water. He liked his long hair much less, stuck to his face as it was. Shaking himself like a dog, Naruto went back on dry land, taking off his Haori, flak jacket and weapon pouches. He wrought out the former, spreading it out on the grass to dry, then debated what to do with the latter. The flak jacket was way too thick to wring out. He checked the pockets, and was satisfied to see that the impervious seals he had put inside of them had worked well. Scrolls, wallet, everything was dry. Same thing for the weapon pouches. Nothing irked Ninja more than a rusty kunai. With a shrug, he set jacket and pouches on the grass to dry, staying in his long-sleeved black shirt and orange pants. The bandages wrapped around his right forearm were soggy and itchy, but Naruto couldn't take them off. That arm's skin was too delicate to be left exposed in a sparring match. Talking about his body, look at that. The wet cloth stuck to his breasts like a second skin, outlining their smooth curve. He could even see his perked S underneath the black fabric. He brushed one, and when a delightful shiver ran down his spine, he snapped his hand back. Bad Naruto, bad. You're training, here, so not the time for that. In that precise moment, a voice called out to him. Hello Naruto. Trust Sakura to always be able to track him when he was having perverted thoughts. Naruto spun on his feet to face her. He hadn't sensed her coming, for his training bout had taken his complete attention. He was somewhat decent at chakra sensing, but he wasn't strong enough for it to be a passive skill. He had to actively concentrate to sense people. Hello Sakura-chan. Sakura waved at him, foregoing walking by taking a few chakra-enhanced jumps that brought her right in front of Naruto. Sorry I'm late, I've had a very stressful. The words seemed to die in her mouth as she looked at Naruto, taking in his state. Something told Naruto it wasn't his drenched clothes and dripping hair that shocked her so. Sakura's green eyes slowly raked Naruto's body from hair to toes, making him feel very uncomfortable. I can explain, he tried, shifting awkwardly. Sakura frowned, glaring at him as if his change of personally offended her. And who knew, maybe it did. She was his best friend, but sometime Naruto really couldn't understand her. Why are you a woman, Naruto? Is this a new version of your perverted jutsu? She asked, her voice calm, almost relaxed, but her creepy smile and her raised fist belied that. Naruto took a cautious step back, keeping an eye on her hands. She may have looked beautiful and small and feminine, but Naruto had seen her slam a man through a wall with but a flick of her fingers. I swear I'm not. It's not my waijutsu, it's just my henge. She didn't look convinced, raising an eyebrow and, more threateningly, her other fist, so he pointed at his clothes. See, I'm wearing real clothes. I don't have clothes when I do my waijutsu, do I? No, he most certainly did not squeal like a little girl. That was a manly scream of fear, a perfectly natural reaction to Sakura taking a step forward and swinging a punch at him. Naruto evaded her fist with a backflip, landing on a handstand and propelling himself further back and away from Sakura with another jump. If she had really meant to pummel him into the ground, she wouldn't have had any problems following him, but as she didn't, he took it that she wasn't on a rampage yet. Naruto, you're wearing a wet shirt and I can see your S. You'd better find another argument. Naruto looked down at his chest. Oh, right, the only way it could have been worse was if it had been a white shirt. Still, he covered the incriminated part with his hands, huffing at Sakura. Stop looking at my boobs. Sakura snorted in a very unladylike fashion, cracking her knuckles. Naruto, she said threateningly, and he raised his hands in surrender. Alright, I'm a woman because I'm experimenting with my solid henge. Tsunade Ba-chan wants to study it to see the effects on the body, and see how long I can keep it, and all that. If you don't believe me, ask her. I have her permission. That was the official cover-up story, at least, and he was sticking to it. Sakura blinked, lowering her fists. Solid henge? You can make a solid henge? I didn't know that. Animosity apparently forgotten, she stepped forward and they were again in normal friend-speaking range. Naruto, glad that the shitstorm had passed, let her, and answered easily, kind of proud of his skills. Yup, I've always been able to do it, actually. It can be pretty handy. Sakura's left eyebrow rose, and she nibbled on her bottom lip. She always did that when confronted with a puzzle whose pieces didn't fit. But that's A-ranked jutsu, and you suck at genjutsu, she said, not mocking him, just stating the truth. She was smart, though, and she already had all the pieces she needed to get to the right conclusion. Kitsune are said to be shapeshifters, she said out slowly, as if giving him the chance to correct her. He didn't. He wasn't ashamed of Kurama, he could never be. The overgrown fox was his friend, and he could never be ashamed of a friend. But he was uneasy with how different being a Jinchuriki made him. His whiskers, his strength, his overdeveloped senses, his shapeshift-like henge, his fox-like traits. He wasn't ashamed per se, but they somehow made him feel less human. He had always been self-conscious about his humanity, and that only had grown tenfold ever since the Fourth Shinobi War and his time as Sage of the Six Paths. Sakura, bless her heart, seemed to realize it was a sore topic for him, and let it drop. Instead, she let the medic nin in her out and asked, so, what are the effects of a solid henge? I'm pretty sure Kakashi-sensei and Kurenai-san can do it, but I never saw them. Naruto shot her a grateful look, to which she answered with a tiny smile. Really, how could he hope for a better friend? My henge physically makes me a woman. Outside. He pointed at his boobs, and inside, he said, patting his belly. Sakura lightened up at that, clapping her hands together, looking like a little girl with a new, shiny toy. Oh, that's so interesting. Tsunade Shisho put you through a complete medical check, I imagine? What did she say? What else changed? Is your chakra the same? How long can you keep this up? And, Naruto laughed and held up his hands, stopping her rain of questions. Wow, calm down. Geez, you're as bad as Ba-chan. He rubbed the back of his nape, smiling. I'm 100% a woman through and through. Ba-chan thinks it takes about a fifth of my chakra just to keep it up. Sakura's eyes widened at that, and Naruto grinned at her surprise, his awkwardness fading in the face of her enthusiasm. Yup, it's kind of draining. I don't think anyone but me could keep it up for long. I, on the other hand, can keep it going as long as I want. It's not a genjutsu, you can't dispel it, only I can undo it. Yes, he was boasting. No, he had no intention to stop. Yes, he was awesome like that. How long have you been in henge? It can't be more a day or two, or the whole village would know it. Naruto laughed awkwardly at that, rubbing the back of his nape. The years of people calling him demon behind him back had left him hating gossip. There was no escaping it, though. Since yesterday afternoon, he answered. This morning Ba-chan ran a few tests, you know, blood tests, a complete physical exam, that kind of thing. And a gynecological exam, but he wasn't going to tattle on that. She had Hyuga Aishamasu check my chakra pathways. She said that they're absolutely unchanged, and that I could probably do ninjutsu without any problems. He pointed at the swamp behind his shoulders, then at his drenched clothing. While I was waiting for you I tried a few katas to see if that was true. Sakura raised an eyebrow in a haughty way that she was bound to have learned from Sasuke. And you went from katas to drowning yourself how? Naruto grinned like the fox he housed. Rasengan, he answered cheerily. Sakura's eye went from Naruto to his wet clothes laid to dry to the pond, and her voice was intrigued. Did you nebulize the water or did you just raise a big wave? Both, was Naruto's enthusiastic answer. Sakura hummed, crossing her arms and tapping a finger on her elbow. Would you be able to vaporize enough water to create mist? Naruto cocked his head sideways, pondering. Probably, I guess. Why? Do you remember that jutsu Zabuza Momochi used in our first C rank? Hiding in the mist technique? Trust Sakura to remember what jutsu Akiri Nin had used against them 7 years ago. Nope, but I can guess from the name. You want me to try something like that? Sakura nodded, a speculative look on her face. She might not have been a genius like Shikamaru, but she was damn smart. Throughout the years she had come up with pretty neat ideas, and Naruto didn't doubt that if someone could find a way replicate Akiri jutsu, that would be Sakura. Sure, I'll try one day and I'll tell you how it goes. It had been the first time they had seen their sensei's Sharingan, now that he thought about it. Which meant, tell you what, I'm pretty sure Kakashi-san copied it that day. I'll ask him to help me out with it. He inwardly preened at remembering not to call him sensei. Tsunade had been adamant he stopped. She had said that if Naruto really wanted to go along with his plan, he needed Kakashi to recognize him as a peer, and calling him sensei kind of negated that. He understood that two Jonin could stand on equal ground, teacher and student didn't. Sakura looked puzzled at the change of honorific on Naruto's part. Naruto saw her opening her mouth, likely to inquire about it, and shook his head resolutely. He didn't want to talk about it. Sakura blinked, puzzled. Then she hummed, rubbing her lips with the back of a finger, observing him with a considering look. Eventually, she let the matter drop and came back to the main subject at hand. So, you've got a uterus? Thank you, Sakura. Yup. Can you get a period? Yup. I discovered that when I was 15 and I stayed in this form for more than a month. The memory had him grimacing. And he had volunteered to go through that again. Sasuke was right, he was a masochist. Is a month the longest you've been like that? Yes. I switched back when I fucking started bleeding. His disgust must have been obvious, for she laughed. Yeah, I imagine that must have been a shock, she said in sympathy. Then, can you get pregnant? Naruto swallowed, trying for indifference. Probably? I mean, it's not like I actively tried, yet. But it would make sense. He wasn't second-guessing his choice, he really wasn't, but talking about it made him feel vaguely nauseous. It had been his idea, and he was set on seeing it through. He didn't want to talk about it out loud until he had come to terms with it. On the wake of that question, Naruto almost saw the cogs moving in Sakura's head and stopped her before she could voice any questions about his UAL life in female form. He was so not going there, so he abruptly changed the subject with all the subtlety he was capable of. Can we spar? I tried to keep my body as closest to my male one as possible, but there are still some differences, and I want to see if they have any effect on my fighting, so can we spar? Please? Unimpressed with his babbling, Sakura raised an eyebrow, silently calling him on his bullshit, and he upped the ante by giving her the puppy dog eyes. With a sigh and an eye roll, Sakura gave in. Alright, let's fight. Just so you know, you're freakishly tall for a woman, Naruto. You might have wanted to be a little shorter to blend in better, she said, taking a few steps back and taking her fighting stance. Relieved, Naruto mirrored her, pushing a rebellious lock of long blonde hair behind his ear. You don't want to warm up first? He asked, but she shook her head. I ran all the way here from the hospital, that's warm up enough today. Since the hospital was on the opposite side of the village from Training Ground 23, Naruto conceded her point. He hadn't been kidding when he had said he wanted to test how much that different body affected his fighting. He already noticed that his center of gravity was lower and he supposed his flexibility as a woman ought to be better, but he wasn't sure. Taijutsu only? He asked, and she nodded, slipping on her fighting gloves. Naruto grinned, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He so loved a good spar. He steadied his stance, distancing his feet and squaring his shoulders. With an arrogant smirk, Sakura beckoned him with a finger, and who was Naruto to deny her? Without warning, he sprinted towards her at top speed, yet she was ready for him, for when his right fist lashed out in a jab, she sidestepped him easily and rewarded him with a punch of her own to the kidneys. Sakura never went all out in their spars, but she didn't hold back either, meaning that being hit by her, instead of simply killing you on the spot, only hurt about as much as being hit by a bijudama. Not eager to taste that, Naruto blocked the blow and pivoted on his right foot, aiming a roundhouse kick at her with his other foot. Sakura ducked below the kick and striking his leg right on a nerve. A burning line of fire shot up from his leg right up to his brain, and Naruto grunted, "Damn, that hurt." As he jumped away, "You're not doing a good job at defending your kunoichi's honor," Sakura mocked him, her hands on her hips like a teacher berating a child. Naruto blew some hair off his face, giving an offended whine before launching himself at her again, but as he poised to attack her with a blatant punch, he instead disappeared from in front of her to reappear in a smokeless shunshin behind her. She turned in time to block his strike with her forearm, but it was a near thing, and she grimaced. Naruto didn't pull his punches. Sakura countered, aiming for the side he had left uncovered, but he anticipated her blow and caught her fist in his hand, gripping it tight and sending her flying over his head. She recovered midair and landed on all fours. She pretended to stand up, then dipped low again and swept her leg in a low arc, right where Naruto's legs used to be, but he did a backflip right in time, jumping above her extended leg and kicking Sakura in the shoulder as he was at it, sending her tumbling backwards from her unstable position. Naruto landed on his feet with a grimace. "Oh Kami, my boobs are killing me." Jumping and uncontained breasts didn't go along. Sakura snapped on her feet and laughed. I bet. Why are you not wearing a bra? She didn't waste any time and took the initiative, rushing at him. Naruto grunted, sidestepping her and her dangerous punches. Of course I'm not. I didn't have any at home. He blocked a low kick with his leg and retaliated with a jab. They had perfected the art of verbal sparring during actual sparring matches. Then after this spar I'm taking you shopping, Sakura promised without skipping a beat, diverting Naruto's punch somewhere beside her head, taking advantage of his unguarded flank to score a hit. Naruto, ed as all air left his lungs. A roundhouse kick had Sakura jumping back, leaving him room to breathe, both physically and metaphorically. Thank Kami. I've come to hate boxers. He used both hands to push his hair behind his ears with a quick flip, then went at her with a quick series of strikes. Sakura's guard was good, for she deflected or parried all his hits. You're wearing boxers? She slipped sideways to escape his barrage, aiming at his undefended back. Well, it's not like I had anything else at home. Naruto was just as quick, jumping away, turning in midair to keep her in sight, but he stumbled halfway through, having misjudged how the weight was shifted in his new body. You really need some new underwear. Sakura was quick to spot his mistake and jumped right at him. Airborne as he was, he could do only so much to twist out of her way, and they collided heavily, forearm against forearm and shin against shin, before both jumping backwards. Yup, Naruto agreed as a burst of speed brought him into Sakura's range. He deflected her defensive punch with an arm, twisting his torso, and hit her in the stomach with his other elbow, hard enough to make her double over. A Sakura in pain was a dangerous Sakura, and yup, he skipped back right in time to avoid a punch that cracked the earth. Naruto shook his head, jerking it to swing his hair back where it belonged. Wah, I hate my hair. It keeps on getting in my face. With a groan, he dropped his stance and slipped off the elastic band with his Hite-8, feeling safe in knowing that Sakura wouldn't attack him with his guard down. You had long hair when we were kids. How could you stand to fight with it? He used his fingers to comb his long, too long, hair into submission, then slipped the elastic band back on, hoping it would keep his hair in check. As if, this morning in the mirror I thought it looked pretty cool. Now I just want to cut it with a kunai and be done with it. Sakura chuckled, arms crossed over her chest, amused. Why don't you do it, then? Naruto shot an envious look at her reasonable hair. It barely brushed her chin, while Naruto's reached past his shoulder blades, and shook his head. Tsunade Ba-chan forbid me from shifting into another henge or to change this one in any way. She said it could mess with her exams and she didn't want to risk it. Sakura hummed at that, and rummaged in the single pouch tied to the black obi of her red kipao dress, fishing out a black tie. I have a spare hairband, if you want. Naruto perked up at that, and bounced up to her, taking it with gratefulness. Thank you. You're a savior. He collected his hair and clumsily tied it off, and oh, the wonder, it finally stayed out of his way. Sakura laughed at his eager smile, then took an aggressive stance. Ready? Naruto grinned, cracking his knuckles. I was born ready. The day had been very pleasant, as far as spring days in Konoha went. Sunny, warm, the smell of plants sprouting and flowers blossoming thick in the air. Birds coming home to nest after a long winter. But as evening approached and the sky darkened, the low sun staining the horizon red and orange, Kakashi's nose told him that the pinkish, puffy clouds being shepherded across the sky would bring a heavy downpour in a few hours, likely before midnight. Kakashi's quiet thoughts about how he hated being rained on were interrupted by Guy's voice, recalling him to the present. Kakashi blinked, averting his eyes from the blue sky to his green-clad friend. "MH, you said something?" Kakashi drawled, voice thick with indolent laziness. His posture reflected the same feeling, slouched, almost sprawled, on the wooden bench, one elbow on the handrest, palm supporting his chin. For once, it wasn't fake to purposefully grate on people's nerves. It was a good day, and Kakashi honestly felt entitled to laze around. I said that I am indeed catching up to you, my hip rival. 86-89. Guy bragged, raising two fingers in a victory sign. The corner of Kakashi's mouth twitched upward in amusement. Not that anyone could see it underneath his mask. "Ma, are you, now? I do still have the lead, Kakashi said, his tone dry. The sarcasm dripping from every word would have made anyone else bristle in irritation. But Guy knew him better than that, and seemed to take it for what it was meant to be, acknowledgement, in Kakashi's personal, socially inept way. The two Jonin were sitting side by side on a bench in the center of a small square, under a majestic oak tree. Or, more accurately, Kakashi was sitting on said bench, while Guy was sitting in his wheelchair next to him. Above their heads, the oak spread its branches over the whole square, brushing the rooftops of the shops fronting onto the square. Only a few hours before, Kakashi had been enjoying the afternoon sun reading a book perched on a rooftop in the South District, comfortably nestled between two chimneys, one of his favorite spots. Having spent the previous week on a mission on the border between fire and fucking rain, he felt entitled to soak up as much sunlight as he could before he was sent off again. If he didn't go to sleep with his underwear sopping wet ever again, it would still be too fucking soon. Kakashi hated rain. Obviously, hiding away in one of his secret spots was not enough to keep Guy off his tail, and the man had somehow found him despite being unable to physically get to the rooftops. Not one to be undone by such trivial things like being bound to a wheelchair, Guy had pelted Kakashi with pebbles. With impressive accuracy, given that Guy couldn't even see him from the road, until the latter had just given up and had come down from his perch to see what he wanted. Unsurprisingly, Guy had nagged him about their challenge, until Kakashi had, once again, given in. There was no one else with the same ability to wear him out with constant pestering until he would do pretty much anything just to make them stop. Except maybe Naruto. Has anyone ever told you your tenacity can be a bit intimidating? Kakashi had quipped, to which Guy had just laughed and honestly answered. Yes, every day of my life since first grade at the academy. That was how they had ended up in that square, or better, at the bakery that faced the square where Guy had challenged Kakashi to an eating contest. Kakashi hadn't appreciated the subtle jab at his thinness. He wasn't underfed, what he ate was his business and his alone. But he had still gone along with Guy's dare. They had gotten an equal number of pastries, salty for Kakashi, sweet for Guy, and the eating contest was on. Guy had won, to absolutely no one's surprise. 2 hours later, the two had yet to move from their bench. No matter how loudly Kakashi complained, he wouldn't change how things were between them for all of Lightning's tea. For all Guy's harassing and Kakashi's apparent irritation, the green-clad Jonin always knew when to press and when not to. When Kakashi was in a truly dark mood, Guy never insisted. Actually, their dramatics were part of the game. Guy would find him, harass him and follow him around until either Kakashi capitulated or lead him on a merry chase. Both outcomes were just as fun for everyone involved. Their dynamic reflected much of them. Guy had always been the one to push forward no matter what, while Kakashi was the one always trying to swim against the tide, and failing. It had been so ever since the academy. Through the years, Kakashi had only learnt to lose with more grace. Actually, so much was still like the academy, even now, after 28 years. Except for a few notable people missing, everyone left still bore so much resemblance to their bratty selves. You know, I just realized. Kakashi looked back up at the moon, already high in the sky and becoming more and more visible as the sky turned from blue to indigo. I'm right back where I started, I guess. Guy made a non-committal noise beside him, half curious, half expectant. What do you mean, my esteemed rival? Kakashi hummed, his voice even. I mean, you know. Before everything happened. Before so many things Kakashi would be hard-pressed to list them all. Before most of his life happened, actually. No Sharingan, no team. It's as if nothing's changed. He raised a hand to the scar bisecting his left eye, but he tore it away as if his own touch burned. A warm hand gripped his shoulder, and Kakashi tore his eyes from the moon to look at his long-term friend, blinking. You still got me, Guy said, his smile still as strong as ever. I had you before. Yeah, and you still got me. Nothing's changed. Kakashi reeled at that, inhaling sharply, his body going rigid for a long, long second. He hadn't expected Guy to agree with him, but then again, Kakashi's genius did not apply on people. Not the people close to him, at least, and certainly not when emotions were concerned. Feelings gave him hives, and they ruined his mask as an asshole. Kakashi sank back against the backrest of the bench, not bothering to shrug off Guy's hand, once more looking up at the ink-stained evening sky. I guess I do. Suddenly, Kakashi felt the burning need to be alone. Suddenly, even Guy's reassuring presence became grating on his fraying nerves. making him feel guilty in sight of all Guy had done for him. Guy squeezed his shoulder once more in silent support, then moved his hands to the wheels of his chair, obviously intending to leave. Kakashi felt a pang of something between relief and unease. Relief because Guy was silently granting him the solitude he suddenly craved. Unease because as much relief it brought him, he felt ill that someone could read him so well. Especially when Kakashi couldn't return the favor half the time. In his eyes, it only cemented the opinion that Guy got the short end of the deal in their friendship. Guy was none the wiser, though. Now, my esteemed rival, I shall take my leave. I promised my most youthful students I would join them for dinner. They just came back from a B rank today, you know, and they want to tell me all about it. While inwardly sighing in relief at the change of subject and mood, outwardly Kakashi rolled his eyes at his friend's boasting. Seriously, if the man preened only a bit more, he'd be doing a wheel like a peacock. It was only a B-rank mission, what was there to be smug about? His students had stopped the end of the world. Kakashi himself may or may not have kind of kick-started it, but that was totally beside the point. I'm sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of Naruto and Sakura telling me about their last success. Kakashi quipped back gleefully, not bothering to stand up as he waved his friend off. Boasting about one's students was a long-standing tradition of Jonin-sensei everywhere, and really, one was the Hokage's assistant, while the other was the head medic's assistant. That beat a puny B-rank mission so hard. Kakashi had expected Guy to suddenly become selectively deaf, as he always did whenever Kakashi lorded his obvious superiority on the matter over him. But instead the green-clad Jonin just burst out laughing, his frame shaking so much he had to stop pushing the wheels. Kakashi blinked at him, reeling. Was there some joke he had missed? After a few long seconds, Guy got himself under control and waved cheerily at the Hitaki, a huge shit-eating grin on his face. Worry crept up Kakashi's spine. Say hello to Naruto-kun for me, my hip rival. With an enthusiastic thumbs up, Guy left, leaving behind a dumbfounded Kakashi. Definitely some kind of joke. What had Naruto done this time? Why did he feel like this prank of his would come and bite him in the ass? Damn, it never bode for Kakashi well when Guy got one on him. That's all for now. If you enjoyed, then please like, share and do comments.